Part 1. The Universal Search for Peace. A guide to finding inner peace with the wisdom of Seneca, Buddha, and Marcus Aurelius. Picture this. It's 6:30 a.m. and your phone buzzes to life. Before you've even opened your eyes, the notifications are already flooding in. 17 new emails, 12 text messages, from missed calls. Your heart rate quickens before you've even gotten out of bed. You reach for your phone, and within seconds, you're scrolling through news headlines that make your chest tighten, social media posts that trigger comparison, and work messages that remind you of everything you didn't finish yesterday. Sound familiar? You stumble to the kitchen, mind already racing with today's to-do list. Coffee brewing. You check the weather, skim more news, respond to urgent messages that probably aren't actually urgent. By 7 a.m., you're already mentally exhausted, and the day hasn't even begun. Your shoulders are tense. Your breathing is shallow, and there's a familiar knot in your stomach that you've grown so accustomed to, you hardly notice it anymore. This is the modern condition. This is what inner turmoil looks like in the 21st century. But here's what might surprise you. This feeling, this restless anxiety, this sense of being overwhelmed by forces beyond your control, this desperate search for peace in a chaotic world, is not new. It's not a product of smartphones or social media or the particular pressures of our time. This is a human condition. This is what it has always felt like, in some form, to be alive and aware in this world. 2,000 years ago, a Roman philosopher named Seneca was writing letters to his friend Lucilius, describing remarkably similar struggles. Every new thing excites pleasure or pain, he observed, and both are distracting. He wrote about the anxiety that comes from trying to control outcomes beyond our influence, the way our minds torture us with imagined futures and replayed past mistakes. We suffer more in imagination than in reality, he noted, a truth as relevant today as it was in ancient Rome. Around the same time, on the other side of the world, a prince named Siddhartha had walked away from a palace life of luxury to sit under a tree, grappling with questions that would have been familiar to any of us lying awake at 3 a.m. Why do we suffer? Why can't we find lasting happiness? Why does everything feel so fragile, so temporary, so unsatisfying? And decades later, Marcus Aurelius, arguably the most powerful man in the world, commanding the greatest empire in history, was writing private notes to himself in his tent during military campaigns. These weren't meant for public consumption. They were the midnight thoughts of a man trying to make sense of the weight he carried, trying to find peace in the midst of enormous responsibility and constant pressure. How much trouble he avoids who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does, he wrote, but only to what he does himself. 3 men, separated by geography and circumstance, united by a common human experience. The search for inner peace in a world that seems designed to disturb it. But why these 3? Why do we turn to a Roman senator, a Buddha, and a Roman emperor when we can consult any number of modern self-help books or therapeutic approaches? The answer lies in the depth and durability of their insights. These weren't men theorizing about peace from positions of comfort. Seneca lived through political upheaval, survived exile, and eventually faced execution. Buddha left everything he knew to confront the fundamental nature of human suffering. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire plagued by war, disease, and internal conflict while dealing with personal tragedy, including the loss of multiple children. They found their wisdom not in spite of their difficulties, but because of them. And remarkably, despite coming from completely different cultures and philosophical traditions, they arrived at strikingly similar conclusions about what disturbs human peace and what restores it. Think about your own life for a moment. What keeps you up at night? What makes your heart race during the day? If you're like most people, it's probably some combination of these familiar anxieties. You worry about things that might happen. The presentation next week, the medical test results, the conversation you need to have with your boss. Your mind spins elaborate scenarios of future disasters, most of which will never occur. You replay things that have already happened. The argument with your partner, the mistake you made at work, the opportunity you missed 5 years ago. You torture yourself with regrets and what-ifs, trying to rewrite a past that cannot be changed. You feel overwhelmed by the sheer volume of demands on your time and attention. There's always more to do, more to worry about, more to keep track of. The list never ends, and you never feel caught up. You compare yourself to others and find yourself lacking. Everyone else seems more successful, more confident, more together. Social media amplifies this, showing you carefully curated highlights of other people's lives while you're intimately aware of your own struggles and imperfections. You feel frustrated by your inability to control outcomes that matter to you. You want your children to be happy, your health to remain good, your work to be appreciated, your relationships to be harmonious. But so much of this feels beyond your direct influence. This is the universal human predicament. This is what Buddha called dukkha, often translated as suffering, but perhaps better understood as an inherent unsatisfactoriness of life when we're constantly grasping for something different than what is. Now, imagine sitting down with these three remarkable minds and asking them directly, how did you find peace in the midst of all this chaos? How did you learn to sleep peacefully in a world full of uncertainty? How did you develop the kind of unshakable serenity that allowed you to function effectively under enormous pressure? Their answers, developed over lifetimes of practice and refined through centuries of testing by millions of people, form the foundation of what might be the most practical wisdom ever discovered about human flourishing. Seneca would tell you that most of our suffering is optional, that we create our own torture through our judgments and expectations about how things should be. He'd show you how to distinguish between what's actually happening and the stories you tell yourself about what's happening. Buddha would explain that your restless mind is like a monkey jumping from branch to branch, never finding satisfaction because it's looking for something permanent in a world where everything is constantly changing. He'd teach you how to find peace not by changing your circumstances, but by changing your relationship to your circumstances. Marcus Aurelius would remind you that you have tremendous power, not over external events, but over your responses to them. He'd show you how to find freedom not by controlling your environment, but by taking responsibility for your inner environment. But perhaps most importantly, all three would tell you something that might initially sound counterintuitive. The peace you're seeking isn't somewhere else. It's not in a future where all your problems are solved, or in a past before things got complicated. It's not dependent on getting a promotion, finding the relationship, or achieving the goal that you think will finally make you happy. The peace you're seeking is available right now, in this moment, regardless of your circumstances. It's not about changing your life. It's about changing how you hold your life. This isn't positive thinking or wishful optimism. This is hard-won wisdom from people who faced real challenges and found real solutions. They discovered that inner peace isn't the absence of problems. It's a different way of being with problems. It's not about avoiding difficulty. It's about developing the kind of inner strength that remains steady in the midst of difficulty. Over the next 9 parts of this journey, we're going to explore exactly how they did this. We're going to unpack the specific practices, perspective, and principles that allowed them to find unshakable serenity in the midst of uncertain times. We're going to discover why try to control what we can't control is the source of most of our suffering, and how focusing on what we can control is a path to genuine freedom. We're going to learn how to work with our minds instead of being victims of them, how to find meaning in difficulty, and how to develop the kind of inner resilience that makes external storms much less disturbing. But most importantly, we're going to discover that the peace these ancient masters found isn't reserved for philosophers or emperors or enlightened beings. It's available to anyone willing to look honestly at their own mind and apply time-tested principles with consistency and compassion. The alarm clock will still ring tomorrow morning. The notifications will still flood in. The world will still be chaotic and uncertain and full of challenges. But you can be different. You can be the kind of person who meets each day from a place of center rather than reactivity, who responds rather than reacts, who carries their own weather instead of being tossed around by every storm. That's the promise of this ancient wisdom. That's what Seneca, Buddha, and Marcus Aurelius discovered, each in their own way, in their own time. And that's what we're going to explore together. Are you ready to begin? Part 2, the nature of suffering, understanding what disturbs our peace. Let me tell you about Sarah. She's a marketing manager at a mid-sized company, mother of 2, married for 12 years. By most external measures, she has a good life. But if you could peek inside her mind on any given Tuesday afternoon, here's what you'd find. She's sitting in a meeting, but she's not really present. Her mind is racing through a dozen different tracks simultaneously. She's worried about her daughter's upcoming parent-teacher conference. What if the teacher has concerns? She's replaying this morning's brief argument with her husband about who should pick up groceries, wondering if he's still annoyed with her. She's anxious about the presentation she has to give next week, imagining all the ways it could go wrong. And underneath it all, there's a low-level hum of dissatisfaction, a feeling that something is missing, that she should be happier, more fulfilled, more something. Sound familiar? This is what the Buddha, 25 centuries ago, called the first noble truth. Life contains dukkha, usually translated as suffering, but that word doesn't quite capture the full meaning. Dukkha is more like a persistent sense of unsatisfactoriness, an inability to feel completely at peace with what is. It's not just the big tragedies, though those are included. It's the everyday friction between what we want and what we get, between how we think things should be and how they actually are. The Buddha didn't start with this insight because he was pessimistic. He started with it because he was realistic. Before we can find genuine peace, we have to understand what's actually disturbing that peace. And here's what these three ancient masters, Buddha, Seneca, and Marcus Aurelius, discovered. Most of our suffering isn't caused by what happens to us. It's caused by our relationship to what happens to us. Let's go deeper. Seneca put it beautifully. We suffer more in imagination than in reality. Think about that for a moment. How much of your mental anguish today was caused by things that actually happened versus things you imagine might happen, or things you remembered and reinterpreted, or things you worried could go wrong? Last week, you probably spent more time suffering about your upcoming dental appointment than you spent actually getting your teeth cleaned. You lost more sleep worrying about a difficult conversation than you spent having that conversation. You've experienced more anxiety about a work project than the project itself actually warranted. This is a peculiar nature of human consciousness. We have the remarkable ability to suffer about our suffering, to worry about our worries, to be anxious about our anxiety. We can make ourselves miserable about events that happened 20 years ago or might happen 20 years from now. We are, in many ways, the only species that can torture itself with its own thoughts. Marcus Aurelius, writing in his personal journal during military campaigns, observed this pattern in himself. How much trouble he avoids who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does, but only to what he does himself. He noticed how his mind would create stories about other people's motivations, judgments about their actions, comparisons between their circumstances and his own. And he recognized that this mental activity, this constant commentary, was the source of most of his disturbance. But let's be specific about how this works in daily life. Our suffering typically falls into several recognizable patterns. The suffering of wanting things to be different. Right now, as you're reading this, there's probably something in your life you wish were different. Maybe it's something small. You wish you had more time to read, or that your commute were shorter. Maybe it's something significant. You wish you had a different job, or that a relationship in your life were more harmonious. This isn't necessarily a problem. Wanting things to improve can motivate positive action. But notice what happens when that wanting becomes a constant background dissatisfaction, a refusal to be okay with what is while you're working toward what might be. Notice how it colors your experience of the present moment. The Buddha called this tanha, literally thirst. It's the constant reaching for something other than what's here now. And he observed that this reaching, this perpetual dissatisfaction with the present moment, is one of the primary causes of human suffering. The suffering of attachment. Seneca lost fortunes, faced exile, survived political upheaval. Through it all, he developed a deep understanding of what he called the tyranny of attachment. We suffer not because we love people and value things, but because we cling to them so tightly that any threat to their permanence becomes a source of anxiety. You love your children, and this love is beautiful. But when that love becomes anxious clinging, constantly worrying about their safety, their happiness, their future, it becomes a source of suffering for both you and them. You value your health, your home, your relationships, and this is natural. But when you hold these things so tightly that you cannot bear the thought of losing them, you live in constant fear. The irony is that the tighter we grip, the more we suffer. And often, the more we suffer about potentially losing something, the less able we are to actually enjoy having it. the suffering of resistance. Marcus Aurelius faced plagues, wars, political intrigue, personal loss. One of his most profound insights was about the additional layer of suffering we create by resisting what's already happening. Accept the things to which fate binds you and love the people with whom fate associates you. This doesn't mean passive resignation or failing to work for positive change. It means recognizing the difference between what's already happened, which resistance cannot change, and what might happen next, which our actions can influence. When you get stuck in traffic, the traffic is not optional. It's already happening. But the frustration, the mental commentary about how this shouldn't be happening, the story about how this ruins your day, that's all optional. That's resistance. And it's often more painful than the original situation, the suffering of mental time travel. Here's something remarkable. Right now, in this actual moment, are you okay? Not your life situation, not your circumstances, not your problems, but right now, in this breath, in this heartbeat, are you fundamentally okay? Most of the time, the answer is yes. The present moment, when we're actually in it, is usually manageable. It's when our minds travel to the past or future that we suffer. The Buddha taught that the mind is rarely where the body is. We're physically here, but mentally elsewhere, replaying yesterday's mistakes, rehearsing tomorrow's challenges, lost in elaborate fantasies about how things should have been or might be. Seneca noticed this too. True happiness is to enjoy the present, without anxious dependence upon the future. And Marcus Aurelius, confine yourself to the present. This isn't about positive thinking or pretending problems don't exist. It's about recognizing that most of our emotional suffering happens when we're not actually present to what's happening now. The suffering of comparison. Social media has amplified this ancient source of suffering, but it's not new. Marcus Aurelius, literally the most powerful person in his world, still struggled with comparing himself to others, measuring his achievements against those around him, wondering if he was doing enough, being enough. We suffer because we compare our internal experience, which includes all our doubts, fears, and imperfections, with other people's external presentations. We compare our behind the scenes with everyone else's highlight reel. But even deeper than social comparison is a comparison between what is and what we think should be. We have internal standards, expectations, templates for how life should unfold, and reality rarely matches our templates exactly. The suffering of seeking permanent satisfaction in temporary things. This might be the most subtle and pervasive form of suffering. We keep trying to find lasting peace through temporary pleasures, permanent security through impermanent things, unchanging happiness in a world where everything changes. You buy something you wanted for months, and for a brief moment, you feel satisfied. But then that satisfaction fades, and you need the next purchase, the next achievement, the next experience to recreate that feeling. The Buddha saw this clearly. We're like someone drinking salt water to quench thirst. The more we drink, the thirstier we become. But here's the crucial insight that all three of these teachers discovered. Recognizing these patterns isn't meant to make us feel hopeless. It's meant to make us free. When you truly understand that most of your suffering is created by your own mental habits, by your resistance to what is, your attachment to what was, your anxiety about what might be, you realize that you have tremendous power. Not power to control external circumstances, but power to change your relationship to those circumstances. Seneca put it this way: every new thing excites pleasure or pain unnecessarily. The key word is unnecessarily. The initial response, pleasure or pain, might be automatic, but what we do with that response, how long we hold on to it, what stories we build around it, how much we let it disturb our peace, that's up to us. This is why understanding the nature of suffering is so crucial. It's not about becoming indifferent or emotionally numb. It's about developing the wisdom to see clearly what's actually happening versus what our minds are adding to what's happening. When Sarah sits in that meeting with her mind racing through 12 different anxieties, she has options she might not realize. She can notice what her mind is doing without being swept away by it. She can recognize the difference between legitimate concerns that require action and mental noise that only creates suffering. She can learn, as these ancient masters learned, that peace doesn't come from arranging external circumstances to match our preferences. Peace comes from developing the inner capacity to remain centered regardless of external circumstances. This understanding, This clear seeing of how we create our own suffering is a foundation of all genuine freedom, because once you see how the mechanism works, you can begin to work with it instead of being its victim. In our next part, we'll explore the specific mechanism that Buddha, Seneca, and Marcus Aurelius identified as the root of most human suffering, our attempt to control things that are ultimately beyond our control. And we'll begin to discover how letting go of that attempt is not a loss of power, but the discovery of real power. But for now, simply notice, throughout your day, see if you can catch yourself in these patterns. Not to judge them or immediately change them, but simply to see them clearly. Because clarity, as our three teachers knew, is a beginning of freedom. Part 3, the illusion of control, releasing what we cannot change. Imagine you're driving to an important job interview. You prepared thoroughly, chosen your outfit carefully, left early to account for traffic. Everything is going according to plan until suddenly you hit a massive traffic jam, construction, an accident, something completely unexpected that brings traffic to a complete standstill. What happens in your mind in that moment? If you're like most people, you immediately start trying to control the uncontrollable. You change lanes frantically, looking for the fastest moving option. You check your GPS obsessively, hoping it will reveal a magical alternate route. You crane your neck to see what's causing the delay, as if knowing will somehow fix it. Your hands grip the steering wheel tighter. Your jaw clenches. Your heart rate increases. You might honk your horn, as if the sound will somehow dissolve the traffic. You might start catastrophizing about being late, imagining the interviewer's disapproval, picturing the job opportunity slipping away. You might blame yourself for not leaving even earlier, or blame the city for poor traffic management, or blame the universe for conspiring against you. And here's the fascinating thing. None of this mental and physical activity has any effect whatsoever on the traffic. You're experiencing tremendous stress and burning enormous energy in an attempt to control something that is completely beyond your control. This is what Marcus Aurelius meant when he wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Welcome to perhaps the most liberating concept in all of human wisdom, the dichotomy of control. This insight, developed most systematically by the ancient Stoics but discovered independently by Buddha and countless other wisdom traditions, might be the single most important thing you ever learn about finding inner peace. Because most of our suffering, most of our stress, most of our mental and emotional turmoil comes from a simple category error. We're trying to control things that cannot be controlled, while neglecting the things that actually can be. Let's start with Seneca, who put it most clearly. Some things are within our power, while others are not. Simple words, but they contain the key to psychological freedom. Seneca lived this principle through extraordinary circumstances. He was advisor to Nero, one of history's most unpredictable and dangerous rulers. He experienced tremendous wealth and devastating loss. He faced exile, political intrigue, and eventually execution. Through it all, he kept returning to this fundamental distinction. What can I actually control here, and what must I accept? What we cannot control. Let's be brutally honest about what falls into this category, because most of us vastly underestimate how much of life is actually beyond our direct control. You cannot control other people's actions, decisions, or responses. You cannot control what your spouse says in an argument, how your boss reacts to your presentation, whether your children follow your advice, or how strangers treat you in daily interactions. This is perhaps the hardest truth to accept because we invest so much energy trying to influence others. We explain, cajole, manipulate, please, threaten, and bargain, all in an attempt to get people to do what we want them to do. And while we can certainly influence others, we cannot control them. Their choices remain their own. You cannot control outcomes, only efforts. You can work diligently on a project, but you cannot control whether it succeeds. You can eat well and exercise regularly, but you cannot control whether you get sick. You can love your children deeply and parent them thoughtfully, but you cannot control how their lives unfold. This doesn't mean effort is pointless. Quite the opposite. But suffering comes when we tie our peace of mind to outcomes rather than efforts. You cannot control the past or the future, only the present moment. Yesterday's mistakes cannot be undone. Tomorrow's challenges cannot be solved today. Yet we spend enormous amounts of mental energy trying to change what has already happened or control what hasn't happened yet. You cannot control your initial emotional reactions. If someone insults you, you cannot control the flash of anger or hurt that arises. If you receive bad news, you cannot control the initial shock or disappointment. These responses are largely automatic, products of your nervous system and past conditioning. You cannot control external events, traffic, weather, other people's behavior, economic conditions, political developments, natural disasters, or the countless variables that affect your daily life. Marcus Aurelius, writing during a plague that devastated the Roman Empire, understood this deeply. Accept the things to which fate binds you, and love the people with whom fate associates you. He couldn't control the disease, the war, the political challenges of his time, but he could control his response to these things, what we can control. Here's where real power lies, and it's both more limited and more profound than most people realize. You can control your attention, where you place your mental focus. Right now, you can choose to focus on these words, or you can let your mind wander to your to-do list, your worries, or your plans for later. This choice, where to place your attention, is perhaps your most fundamental power. Buddha spent years exploring this power. He discovered that suffering comes not from external circumstances, but from where we habitually place our attention. We can choose to focus on what's wrong, what's missing, what's threatening, or we can choose to focus on what's here, what's possible, what's within our influence. You can control your responses to events. You cannot control what happens, but you have significant influence over how you respond to what happens. You can respond from reactivity or reflection, from fear or courage, from kindness or hostility. This is not about suppressing emotions or pretending everything is fine. It's about creating a space between stimulus and response, what Viktor Frankl called man's last freedom, and using that space consciously. You can control your values and principles. External circumstances might limit your options, but they cannot force you to violate your deepest values. Seneca maintained his philosophical principles even when facing death. Marcus Aurelius held to his ethical standards even under enormous political pressure. You can control your efforts and intentions. You cannot control whether people like your work, but you can control how much care and attention you put into it. You cannot control whether someone accepts your apology, but you can control whether you offer sincerely. You can control your internal commentary. This is perhaps the most subtle but powerful form of control. You cannot control what happens, but you have significant influence over the story you tell yourself about what happens. The traffic jam transformed. Let's return to that traffic jam, but this time approach it with the wisdom of control. You're still stuck. You're still going to be late. But now, instead of fighting reality, you make a clear distinction. What you cannot control: the traffic, the construction, the other drivers, the exact time you'll arrive at your interview. What you can control: your response to being stuck, how you use this unexpected time, the story you tell yourself about what this means, how you explain the situation to your interviewer, what you learn from this experience. With this shift in focus, everything changes. Instead of gripping the steering wheel in frustration, you might take some deep breaths and use this time for reflection or planning. Instead of catastrophizing about being late, you might call ahead to explain the situation professionally. Instead of seeing this as a disaster, you might view it as an opportunity to demonstrate grace under pressure. The external situation hasn't changed. You're still stuck in traffic, but your internal experience has been completely transformed. The Buddhist perspective, letting go. Buddha discovered this principle through a slightly different lens. He taught about attachment and non-attachment, not as indifference, but as a way of loving without clinging, care without controlling. The root of suffering, he observed, is our tendency grasp to hold tightly to outcomes, people, circumstances, even our own identity and preferences. This grasping creates a constant state of anxiety because everything we're grasping is inherently impermanent and beyond our ultimate control. Non-attachment doesn't mean not caring. A non-attached parent loves their child deeply, but doesn't try to control every aspect of the child's experience. A non-attached worker puts full effort into their job, but doesn't tie their self-worth to their performance reviews. The practical challenge. Understanding this distinction intellectually is one thing. Living it is another. Most of us have spent years, even decades, developing habits to try and control the uncontrollable. These habits run deep, and changing them requires practice and patience. Start small. Notice throughout your day how much mental energy you spend trying to control things beyond your control. Notice how you feel when you're stuck in traffic, when someone doesn't respond to your text immediately, when the weather doesn't cooperate with your plans. Then practice redirecting that energy toward what you actually can control. Instead of mentally rehearsing what you'll say to change someone's mind, focus on clarifying your own position. Instead of worrying about whether your presentation will be well received, focus on preparing it thoroughly. Instead of ruminating about past mistakes, focus on what you can learn and do differently going forward. The paradox of control. Here's the beautiful paradox that Seneca, Buddha, and Marcus Aurelius all discovered. The more you try to control what cannot be controlled, the more out of control you feel. But the more you focus on what can actually be controlled, the more genuinely powerful you become. When you stop wasting energy fighting reality, you have more energy for shaping it. When you stop trying to control other people's responses, you become more skilled at influencing them positively. When you accept what cannot be changed, you become more effective at changing what can be changed. This isn't resignation or passivity. It's strategic wisdom. It's the difference between pushing against a locked door and finding the key. Marcus Aurelius put perfectly. Confine yourself to the present, not because the future doesn't matter, but because the present is where your actual power lies. Right now, in this moment, you have choices. You can choose how to respond, where to place your attention, what story to tell yourself about what's happening. These choices might seem small, but they compound over time into something magnificent. A life lived from the inside out rather than the outside in, a peace that doesn't depend on external circumstances arranging themselves to your liking. In our next part, we'll explore what happens in our minds when we habitually try to control the uncontrollable, how our thoughts become our primary battleground, and how ancient wisdom can help us find peace in the midst of mental chaos. But for now, try the simple practice. For one day, notice every time you catch yourself trying to control something beyond your control. Don't judge it. Don't try to immediately change it. Just notice it. You might be surprised by how often it happens. And that awareness itself is the first step toward freedom. Because as our three guides discovered, true power isn't about controlling life. It's about mastering your response to life. And that mastery begins with knowing the difference. Part 4, the mind as battlefield. Understanding our internal conflicts. It's 3:17 a.m. and David is wide awake. He has to give a presentation to the board of directors tomorrow. Today, actually. And his mind is spinning like a washing machine on an unbalanced load. One part of his mind is rehearsing what he'll say, trying to anticipate every possible question. Another part is catastrophizing about what could go wrong. A third part is criticizing him for not being better prepared. And underneath it all, there's a voice questioning whether he's even qualified for this job, whether his colleagues respect him, whether his career is heading in the right direction. He tries to tell himself to just go to sleep. You need rest to perform well tomorrow. But now another voice pipes up, berating him for being awake, calculating how few hours of sleep he'll get, predicting how tired and unprepared he'll feel in the morning. Welcome to the mind as battlefield. If you've ever lain awake at night with racing thoughts, if you've ever found yourself having arguments with people who aren't there, if you've ever noticed your mind jumping from worry to regret to fantasy to criticism in the span of a few minutes, then you understand what Buddha meant when he described the mind as being like a monkey jumping from branch to branch, never still, never satisfied, never at peace. This internal chaos isn't a modern phenomenon created by smartphones and information overload. 25 centuries ago, Buddha was exploring the same restless mental patterns. 2,000 years ago, Marcus Aurelius was writing private notes to himself. Try to understand why his mind created so much unnecessary suffering. Around the same time, Seneca was developing practical strategies for working with the endless commentary of his own thoughts. What they discovered, and what modern neuroscience has confirmed, is that the untrained mind is not your friend. Left to its own devices, it will create elaborate problems, replay painful memories, anticipate disasters that will never happen, and generally make your life much more difficult than it needs to be. But here's the crucial insight. You are not your thoughts. You're the awareness that observes thoughts. And this distinction between the thinker and the thoughts, between the observer and the observed, is the key to finding peace in mental chaos. The nature of the restless mind. Buddha used the term monkey mind to describe our ordinary mental state, but he also called it the untamed elephant. Powerful, potentially destructive, but trainable with patience and skill. Let's examine exactly what this untamed mind does. It jumps between past, present, and future with no apparent logic. One moment you're thinking about what to have for lunch. The next moment you're remembering an embarrassing incident from high school. Then suddenly you're worrying about a meeting next week. This isn't random. There are usually emotional connections between these thoughts, but the jumping itself creates a sense of mental fragmentation. Marcus Aurelius noticed this pattern in himself. At dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, I have to go to work as a human being. Even the most disciplined minds experience the scattered quality, this resistance to staying focused on what actually matters. It creates problems where none exist. Seneca observed, we are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more from imagination than from reality. Your mind will take a neutral email from your boss and spin it into evidence that you're about to be fired. It will interpret a friend's brief response as a sign they're angry with you. It specializes in turning molehills into mountains. It replays the past obsessively, trying to solve problems that have already been solved or change outcomes that cannot be changed. You might find yourself rehearsing what you should have said in an argument from 3 days ago, or repeatedly analyzing a mistake you made at work, as if thinking about it enough times will somehow undo it. It rehearses future scenarios compulsively, most of them negative. Your mind will create elaborate disaster movies, complete with dialogue and emotional reactions, about events that haven't happened and may never happen. It will spend hours preparing for conversations that never occur and solving problems that never arise. It judges constantly, yourself, others, situations, even the weather. This shouldn't be happening. I should be further along in my career by now. That person is so annoying. Why is it always raining when I have outdoor plans? This running commentary creates a persistent background of dissatisfaction. The commentary track. Imagine watching a movie with someone who never stops talking. They're constantly commenting on the plot, predicting what will happen next, comparing this movie to other movies, criticizing the actor performances, explaining things you already understand. After a while, you can barely hear the actual dialogue, and you certainly can't enjoy the story. This is what your mind does to your life. Every experience comes with a built-in commentary track. You can't eat a meal without your mind comparing to other meals, evaluating whether you should be eating something healthier, calculating calories, or thinking about what you'll eat next. You can't have a conversation without part of your mind analyzing how the other person is responding to you, planning what you'll say next, or judging whether you're being interesting enough. Marcus Aurelius recognized this tendency in himself. How much trouble he avoids who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does, but only to what he does himself. He noticed how his mind would create elaborate stories about other people's motivations and actions, stories that usually had little to do with reality and created unnecessary mental turmoil. The emotional amplifier. Here's where the mind's commentary becomes particularly destructive. It doesn't just observe emotions, it amplifies them. You feel a flash of anger, and instead of letting it pass naturally, your mind starts building a case for why you should be angry. It recalls every other time this person has annoyed you, imagines how you'll express your anger, anticipates their response, and works itself into a rage that's completely disproportionate to the original trigger. Seneca understood this process intimately. Every new thing excites pleasure or pain unnecessarily. The initial emotional response might be automatic and brief, but our mental elaboration of that response, our thoughts about our thoughts, our stories about what our emotions mean, this is where suffering multiplies exponentially. Buddha described this as the second arrow. The first arrow is what happens. Someone criticizes you, you make a mistake, you face a disappointment. This arrow hurts, but the pain is usually manageable and temporary. The second arrow is what your mind does with what happened. The story it tells, the meaning it creates, the future predicts based on the single event. This second arrow often causes far more suffering than the first. The illusion of the narrator. One of the most profound discoveries in contemplative traditions is that the voice in your head, the one that seems to be you, commenting on everything, making decisions, creating stories, is not actually in charge. It's more like a radio that's always on, providing a running commentary on your experience, but it's not the essential you. Marcus Aurelius was fascinated by this distinction. In his private journals, he would often address himself in the second person. You must ask yourself at every moment, is this something that's up to me or not? He was clearly aware that there was an observer, the one doing the asking, and a mental process being observed. This narrator in your head claims to know what everything means, why things happen, what will happen next, what other people are thinking, what you should do about everything. But if you pay close attention, you'll notice that this narrator is often wrong. It predicts disasters that don't occur, assigns motivation to people that turn out to be completely inaccurate, and create elaborate explanations for simple events. The wars we fight with ourselves. Here's where the battlefield metaphor becomes most relevant. Not only does your mind create unnecessary external conflicts by misinterpreting situations and other people's actions, but also wages war against itself. Part of your mind wants to eat the cookie. Another part judges you for wanting it. Part of you is excited about a new opportunity. Another part lists all the ways it could go wrong. Part of you wants to relax and enjoy the weekend. Another part insists you should be more productive. Buddha called these conflicting desires and impulses the warring factions of the mind. Without awareness and skillful management, these internal conflicts can consume enormous amounts of mental energy and create persistent feelings of self-doubt and inner turmoil. Seneca experienced this too. In his letters to Lucilius, he frequently writes about the challenge of aligning his actions with his values, of managing the competing voices in his mind that pulled him toward pleasure, toward status, toward safety, toward what he knew was right, the observer self. But here's the profound discovery that all three of these teachers made. There's a part of you that can step back and observe all of this mental activity without being caught up in it. There's an awareness that can watch thoughts arise and pass away, that can notice emotions without being overwhelmed by them, that can observe the mind's patterns without being enslaved by them. This observer self is what Marcus Aurelius was addressing when he wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you'll find strength." The strength comes from recognizing that you don't have to believe every thought that arises, follow every emotional impulse, or be victimized by every mental pattern. Buddha spent years developing this capacity for what he called mindful awareness, the ability to observe mental and emotional processes with clarity and equanimity. He discovered that when you can observe the mind's activities without immediately reacting to them, they begin to have less power over you. Working with mental weather. Think of your thoughts and emotions like weather patterns. Storms arise, rage for a while, then pass. Clouds form and dissolve. Sometimes it's sunny. Sometimes it rains. Sometimes it's foggy. You don't take the weather personally. You don't think you can control it. And you don't expect it to remain the same forever. Your mental and emotional weather works the same way. Anxious thoughts are like storm clouds. They feel overwhelming when you're inside them, but they're temporary and they will pass. Angry thoughts are like thunderstorms, intense and dramatic, but brief if you don't feed them with more thoughts. Sad thoughts are like gentle rain, sometimes needed but not permanent. Seneca put it beautifully. Every new thing excites pleasure or pain, but if we don't add fuel to these initial reactions, they naturally subside. The fuel is our mental commentary, our analysis, our resistance, or our grasping. The practice of non-identification. This doesn't mean becoming emotionless or thoughtless. It means developing the capacity to have thoughts and emotions without being completely identified with them. Instead of "I am angry," you might notice anger is present. Instead of "I'm an anxious person," you might observe anxiety is arising right now. This subtle shift in language reflects a profound shift in relationship to your internal experience. You begin to see that you are not your thoughts, you are not your emotions, you are not your mental patterns. You are the awareness that experiences all of these things. Marcus Aurelius practiced this constantly. When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, "The people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly." This wasn't pessimism. It was preparation. He was training his mind to observe reactions without being overwhelmed by them, finding the eye of the storm. In every hurricane, there's an eye, a center of perfect calm surrounded by chaos. The same is true of mental storms. No matter how turbulent your thoughts and emotions become, there's always a center of awareness that remains peaceful and clear. Finding this center doesn't require stopping thoughts or eliminating emotions. It requires developing the skill to rest in awareness itself, rather than being carried away by the content of awareness. This is what Buddha discovered under the Bodhi tree, what Marcus Aurelius cultivated during his military campaigns, what Seneca developed through decades of philosophical practice. They learned to find peace not by controlling their minds, but by changing their relationship to their minds. In our next part, we'll explore the specific practices these teachers developed for working skillfully with mental and emotional patterns. We'll learn how mindful awareness can transform not just how we think, but how we live. But for now, simply begin to notice. Throughout your day, see if you can catch glimpses of the observer, the part of you that notices thoughts arising, that watches emotions come and go, that remains present even when everything else is changing. This observer is your deepest strength, your most reliable refuge, your pathway to unshakable peace. And it's been there all along, waiting patiently for you to remember who you really are. Part 5, the practice of mindful awareness. Observing without being consumed. Picture this. You're sitting in a meeting that was supposed to last 30 minutes, but has now stretched to an hour and a half. The presenter is droning on about quarterly metrics while simultaneously clicking through slides filled with incomprehensible charts. Your mind begins to wander. First, you're thinking about the emails piling up in your inbox. Then you remember you forgot to call your dentist to reschedule tomorrow's appointment. Suddenly you're planning what to make for dinner. Then worrying about whether your teenager got home safely from school, then calculating how much sleep you'll get if this meeting ever ends. Meanwhile, your body is sending signals too. Your back aches from the uncomfortable chair. Your shoulders are creeping up toward your ears. Your jaw is clenched. Your breathing has become shallow and rapid. But you're so lost in mental activity that you don't notice any of these physical sensations until you finally shift in your seat and realize you're completely rigid with tension. This is what it looks like to live unconsciously, to be physically present but mentally absent, to be so caught up in the commentary track of your mind that you miss the actual movie of your life. Now imagine the same scenario with a different quality of awareness. You're in the same endless meeting, but this time you notice when your mind starts to wander. You observe the mental drift toward emails and dinner plans without getting swept away by it. You feel the tension building in your shoulders and consciously soften them. You notice your breathing has become shallow and gently deepen it. You're still in a boring meeting, but you're awake within the experience rather than checked out from it. This is mindful awareness in action, the practice of being present to what's actually happening instead of lost in mental noise about what's happening. The revolutionary simplicity of presence. When Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree 25 centuries ago, he wasn't trying to achieve some mystical state or supernatural power. He was conducting the most practical experiment imaginable. What happens if I simply pay attention to what's actually occurring moment by moment, without immediately trying to change it, fix it, or escape from it? What he discovered revolutionized human understanding of the mind and suffering. The problem wasn't that life contains difficulties. Pain, loss, uncertainty, and change are inevitable. The problem was the layers of mental and emotional reactivity we habitually add to these basic facts of existence. You lose a job, and that's painful. But then your mind creates an elaborate story about what this means about you as a person, your future prospects, what others will think, how you failed your family. The actual event, losing a job, might require practical steps like updating your resume and applying for new positions. But the suffering comes from the mental elaboration, the story-making, the catastrophizing about future scenarios that may never occur. Buddha's revolutionary insight was that you can experience the pain without adding the suffering. You can have the initial emotional response without being consumed by it. You can face difficulties without being overwhelmed by mental commentary about those difficulties. This isn't about becoming emotionless or indifferent. It's about developing what he called clear comprehension, the ability to see what's actually happening without the distorting filter of unconscious mental habits. Marcus Aurelius, the daily discipline of awareness. Marcus Aurelius understood that mindful awareness doesn't happen automatically. In a world full of distractions, demands, and emotional triggers, presence requires deliberate cultivation. His approach was refreshingly practical and systematic. Every morning, before dealing with complexities of ruling an empire, Marcus would spend time setting his mental compass, not through wishful thinking or positive mantras, but through clear-eyed preparation for realities of human interaction and the uncertainties of life. When you wake up in the morning, he wrote in his private journal, remind yourself what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love. This was a mere gratitude practice, though gratitude was part of it. This was training his mind to begin each day from a foundation of appreciation rather than complaint, presence rather than distraction. He would also prepare for the inevitable challenges. The people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. This wasn't cynicism. It was realistic preparation. By anticipating difficulties and choosing his response in advance, he was less likely to be caught off guard and react unconsciously when those difficulties arose. Most importantly, he would remind himself of the fundamental distinction between what he could and couldn't control. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. This daily reminder helped him focus his attention and energy where they could actually make a difference. His evening practice was equally systematic. At the end of each day, he would reflect on his experiences with the curiosity of scientists. What did I learn today? Where did I respond skillfully? And where did I react unconsciously? How can I grow from today's experiences? Seneca's art of present moment living. While Buddha and Marcus Aurelius developed formal practices of mindful awareness, Seneca approached presence through the art of daily living. He was fascinated by how quality of attention transforms quality of experience. Every new thing excites pleasure or pain, he observed, but these initial responses are brief and natural. Our suffering comes from elaborate stories we build around these simple reactions. He learned to experience emotions without being enslaved by them, to have preferences without being controlled by them. In his letters to his friend Lucilius, Seneca frequently writes about the simple pleasure of truly tasting his food, really seeing the sky, fully listening to music. He discovered that presence transforms ordinary experiences into sources of genuine satisfaction. He also developed what we might call real-time awareness, the practice of noticing mental and emotional patterns as they're happening rather than only recognizing them in retrospect. I notice that I'm becoming irritated by this person's slow pace, he might observe to himself. This is impatience. I can choose to either speed up, slow down, or simply accept the rhythm of this moment. This kind of moment-to-moment awareness allowed him to respond from wisdom rather than react from habit. Instead of being the victim of his automatic responses, he became the author of his conscious choices. The breath as gateway. All three teachers discovered that the breath offers a reliable pathway back to present moment awareness. Not because there's anything mystical about breathing, but because it's always happening, always available, and always occurring in the present moment. You cannot breathe in the past or the future. You can only breathe now. When your mind is spinning stories about what happened yesterday or might happen tomorrow, simply noticing your breath brings you back to present moment reality. This doesn't require elaborate breathing techniques or complicated practices. It's as simple as taking 3 conscious breaths when you notice your mind has become scattered, not changing your breathing, just noticing it, not trying to breathe perfectly, just being aware of the breath that's already happening. Buddha developed entire meditation practices around breath awareness, but the essence is remarkably simple. Use your breathing as an anchor for attention. When thoughts pull you into mental elaboration, return to the breath. When emotions threaten to overwhelm you, breathe with them rather than fighting against them. When you feel scattered or overwhelmed, let your breathing ground you in the present moment. The body's wisdom. Your body is always in the present moment. It cannot be anywhere else. When your mind is racing into the future or replaying the past, your body remains here, now, offering constant invitations to return to presence. Marcus Aurelius often anchored his awareness in physical sensations. Feel your feet on the ground. Notice your posture. Observe the sensations in your hands. This grounding in bodily experience served as a reality check, when his mind was creating elaborate mental dramas about political situations or personal concerns. Your body also provides early warning signals about stress and emotional reactivity. Before your mind fully recognizes that you're becoming angry, your jaw might clench or your shoulders might tense. Before you consciously realize you're anxious, your breathing might become shallow or your stomach might tighten. Learning to read these bodily signals allows you to catch reactive patterns early, when you still have choices about how to respond. Instead of being overwhelmed by a full-blown emotional reaction, you can notice the first stirrings of reactivity and choose a different path, working with thoughts like clouds. One of the most practical discoveries in contemplative traditions is that thoughts are like weather patterns. They arise, remain for a while, then naturally pass away if you don't feed them with additional thoughts. The angry thought that feels so solid and important will dissolve on its own if you don't build a case for why you should be angry. The anxious worry that seems so urgent will fade if you don't elaborate it into a full disaster scenario. The judgmental observation about someone else will pass if you don't construct an entire story about their character flaws. Buddha used a metaphor of clouds passing through the sky. The sky isn't disturbed by clouds. It simply allows them to arise and pass away. Similarly, your fundamental awareness isn't disturbed by thoughts and emotions. It can simply allow them to come and go without getting caught up in their drama. This doesn't mean suppressing or denying thoughts. It means changing your relationship to them. Instead of being thoughts, you learn to have thoughts. Instead of being swept away by mental activity, you learn to observe it with some degree of objectivity. Seneca practices regularly. I notice I'm having a thought that this person doesn't respect me. But this is just a thought, not necessarily reality. I can observe this mental activity without immediately believing it or acting on it. The practice of gentle return. Perhaps the most important skill in developing mindful awareness is learning to return to presence gently, without self-judgment, whenever you notice your mind has wandered. This might happen dozens of times in a single conversation, hundreds of times in a day. This isn't a problem to be solved. It's the practice itself. Every time you notice you've been lost in thought and gently return to present moment awareness, you're strengthening what we might call the muscle of mindfulness. Like physical exercise, the benefit comes not from perfect performance, but from consistent practice. Marcus Aurelius was remarkably kind to himself in this process. When you notice your mind has wandered, don't criticize yourself. Simply return to what you were doing. The noticing itself is awareness. The returning itself is the practice. This gentle approach prevents the common trap of making mindfulness practice another source of self-criticism. Instead of judging yourself for having a wandering mind, which is completely natural, you can appreciate the moments when you notice mind wandering and choose to return to presence. Presence in relationship. One of the most profound applications of mindful awareness is in your relationships with others. When you're truly present with another person, not planning what you'll say next, not judging their appearance or opinions, not mentally organizing your to-do list, something remarkable happens. They feel seen, heard, and valued in a way that's increasingly rare in our distracted world. This quality of presence is one of the greatest gifts you can offer another person. It costs nothing, requires no special skills or knowledge, but creates profound connection and mutual understanding. Seneca wrote to Lucilius, "When someone is speaking to you, listen with your whole being. Don't just wait for your turn to talk. Actually hear what they're saying, notice how they're feeling, be genuinely curious about their experience." This kind of presence naturally generates empathy and compassion. When you're truly present with someone else's joy, their joy becomes more vivid. When you're present with their pain without immediately trying to fix or escape it, your capacity for genuine compassion develops naturally. The ripple effects of awareness. What begins as a personal practice of mindful awareness gradually transforms every aspect of your life. When you're present with your work, you're more creative, efficient, and satisfied. When you're present with daily activities like eating or walking, they become sources of genuine pleasure rather than mindless routines. When you're present with challenges, you respond from wisdom rather than react from fear or habit. Buddha discovered that mindful awareness naturally gives rise to what he called right action, behavior that's skillful, compassionate, and beneficial rather than reactive, harmful, or unconscious. When you can see situations clearly, without the distorting filter of mental elaboration, you naturally make better choices. Marcus Aurelius found that presence enhances effectiveness as a leader. Instead of reacting to political intrigue with more intrigue, he learned to respond from his centered awareness, which proved far more powerful than any reactive strategy. Seneca discovered that presence enhances enjoyment of life's simple pleasures, while also building resilience for life's inevitable difficulties. When you're truly present, ordinary moments become extraordinarily rich, and challenging moments become more manageable. Starting where you are. The beautiful thing about mindful awareness is that you can begin right now, exactly where you are, with whatever you're experiencing. You don't need to change your circumstances, acquire new skills, or wait for the perfect moment. Presence is always available. Choose one routine daily activity. Drinking your morning coffee, brushing your teeth, walking from your car to your office, and practice being fully present for it. When your mind wanders to other things, gently notice where it went and return to the immediate sensory experience of what you're doing. Try what might be called a stop practice. Several times throughout your day, literally stop what you're doing. Take a breath. Observe what's happening in your mind and body, and then proceed with conscious awareness rather than unconscious habit. Practice the evening reflection that both Marcus Aurelius and Seneca developed. Before sleep, spend a few minutes reviewing your day with curiosity and kindness. What moments were you most present? What situations triggered unconscious reactions? What did you learn? How might you bring more awareness to similar situations tomorrow? Most importantly, approach this practice with patience and self-compassion. Mindful awareness isn't about achieving some perfect state of perpetual presence. It's about gradually waking up to your own life, becoming the author of your responses rather than the victim of your reactions. Every moment offers a fresh opportunity to return to presence. This moment, this breath, this experience, this is where your peace is found, and this is where your power lies. The ancient masters discovered this truth through years of dedicated practice, but the essence is available to you right now. In our next part, we'll explore how this foundation of mindful awareness naturally flowers into wisdom and virtue, how being truly present leads to living well, and how inner peace becomes a foundation for ethical action in a complex world. But for now, simply begin. Notice this moment. Feel your breathing. Sense your body. Observe what's happening in your mind without getting lost in it. This is the practice that transforms everything, and it starts exactly where you are. Part 6. Virtue is a path to peace. Living according to wisdom. Here's a scenario that might sound familiar. You're in a checkout line at the grocery store, running late for your next appointment, when the elderly woman in front of you begins fumbling through a mountainous purse, searching for exact change for a $3.47 purchase. Behind her, coins scatter across the floor. The cashier looks impatient. The line is growing longer. You can feel frustration rising in your chest. In this moment, you have choices that reveal something profound about the relationship between your actions and your inner peace. You could sigh loudly, tap your foot, check your phone dramatically, or make a comment under your breath. All expressions of irritation that actually increase your own stress while making everyone around you uncomfortable. You could mentally rehearse the story you'll tell later about inconsiderate people who hold up lines, feeding your sense of victimhood and righteous annoyance. Or you could take a different path entirely. You could offer to help pick up the scattered coins. You could smile reassuringly at the flustered woman. You could use this unexpected pause to take a few conscious breaths and appreciate having nowhere else to be but right here, right now. You could choose patience over impatience, kindness over irritation, presence over reactivity. Here's what our 3 ancient guides discovered. The second approach doesn't just make you a nicer person, it actually creates more inner peace. Acting in alignment with your deepest values, responding from wisdom rather than impulse, choosing virtue over convenience. This isn't just morally admirable, it's psychologically liberating. This is a profound connection between ethics and inner peace that Buddha, Marcus Aurelius, and Seneca all discovered through direct experience. Virtue isn't a burden imposed from outside. It's a natural flowering of wisdom and the most reliable path to genuine serenity. The Stoic understanding of virtue. Marcus Aurelius and Seneca, following the Stoic tradition, identified 4 cardinal virtues that serve as both ethical guidelines and practical tools for inner peace. wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. But they understood these not as abstract ideals or rigid rules, but as living qualities that arise naturally from clear seeing and skillful responding. Wisdom, Sophia, is the ability to see situations clearly without the distorting filter of wishful thinking, fear, or self-interest. It's recognizing what you can and cannot control, understanding the difference between what happens to you and your response to what happens, seeing through illusions that create suffering. When you're stuck in that checkout line, wisdom recognizes that the woman's slow pace is not a personal affront to you, that your appointment will wait or it won't regardless of your emotional state, that this moment of delay might actually be exactly what you need to slow down and return to presence. Justice, Dikeasign, isn't just about following laws or rules. It's about recognizing your fundamental interconnection with all life and acting from that recognition. It's treating others as you would want to be treated, considering the broader impact of your actions, taking responsibility for your part in the web of relationships that makes life possible. In the grocery line, justice might look like remembering that you too have been the slow customer, that this elderly woman deserves patience and respect, that your irritation serves no one, and your kindness might be the bright spot in someone's difficult day. Courage, Andrea, is the willingness to do what's right even when it's difficult, uncomfortable, or unpopular. It's speaking truth with compassion, standing up for what you believe in, facing challenges without being overwhelmed by them, choosing growth over comfort. Sometimes courage looks heroic, standing up to injustice or facing serious illness with dignity. But often it's quieter, choosing honesty in a conversation where a lie would be easier, offering help when you're busy, maintaining your principles when compromise would be more convenient. Temperance, Sophocles, is moderation and self-regulation, the ability to enjoy pleasures without being enslaved by them, to have preferences without being controlled by them, to want things without being desperate for them. This isn't about denying yourself joy or living ascetically. It's about finding the sweet spot where you can appreciate good things fully without needing them desperately, where you can pursue goals enthusiastically without being devastated if they don't work out exactly as planned. Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path. Buddha approached virtue from a slightly different angle, developing what he called the Noble Eightfold Path, 8 interconnected practices that support both ethical living and inner peace. Like the Stoic virtues, these aren't commandments imposed from outside, but organic expressions of wisdom and compassion. Right understanding and right intention form the foundation. Seeing reality clearly and setting intentions that are rooted in love rather than hatred, generosity rather than greed, freedom rather than delusion. This is about getting your inner compass aligned with truth and compassion before taking action in the world. Right speech, right action, and right livelihood are the ethical expressions of that inner alignment. Speaking truthfully and kindly, acting in ways that don't cause harm, earning a living through means that don't exploit or damage others or yourself. Buddha understood that outer harmony and inner peace are intimately connected. When your actions align with your deepest values, you don't carry the burden of guilt, regret, or cognitive dissonance. When you speak truthfully, you don't have to maintain elaborate stories to cover your deceptions. When your work contributes to well-being rather than harm, you can engage with it wholeheartedly. Right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration are the practices that support and sustain ethical living. The willingness to apply yourself to growth and learning, the cultivation of present moment awareness we explore in the last part, and the development of mental stability and clarity. What's remarkable about Buddha's approach is how he recognized that virtue and inner peace aren't separate goals that sometimes conflict with each other. They're mutually reinforcing aspect of a life lived in alignment with reality. The inner harmony of aligned action. Here's something you might have noticed in your own life. When you act in ways that contradict your deepest values, you feel internally conflicted even if no one else knows what you did. When you're dishonest, even about small things, part of your mind has to keep track of the deception. When you're unkind, even when you can justify it, something inside you feels out of alignment. Conversely, when you act with integrity, when your actions flow from your deepest wisdom and compassion, there's an internal harmony that no external reward can provide. You sleep better. You worry less about what others think. You have more energy because you're not maintaining internal contradictions. Seneca discovered this through direct experience. Every new thing excites pleasure or pain. But when our actions align with virtue, we experience a pleasure that doesn't depend on external circumstances and a peace that can't be disturbed by changing conditions. This isn't about moral superiority or self-righteousness. It's about the simple psychological reality that internal conflict creates suffering and internal alignment creates peace. Marcus Aurelius on duty and service. Marcus Aurelius, burdened with enormous responsibilities as emperor, developed a profound understanding of how service to others becomes a source of inner peace rather than stress. "What injures a hive injures the bee," he wrote, recognizing that individual well-being and collective well-being are ultimately inseparable. When you're stuck in traffic, you could spend that time mentally criticizing other drivers for their selfishness or incompetence. Or you could recognize that everyone in traffic is trying to get somewhere important to them. Everyone is dealing with their own challenges and limitations. Everyone deserves patience and consideration. The second approach doesn't just make traffic more pleasant for everyone. It creates more peace in your own mind. Instead of seeing yourself as separate from and opposed to the world around you, you begin to experience your fundamental interconnection with all life. Marcus practiced this daily. When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, "I shall be meeting with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness. But I won't be surprised or disturbed, for I can't imagine a world without such people." This wasn't cynicism. It was preparation for responding to difficulties with virtue rather than reactivity. By accepting that challenges are inevitable and choosing his responses in advance, he was less likely to be thrown off balance by the normal difficulties of human interaction. The practice of ethical reflection. All three teachers developed practices for examining their actions and intentions with clarity and honesty. This wasn't self-torture or excessive self-criticism, but the kind of gentle, curious examination that supports continued growth and learning. Seneca's evening review included ethical reflection. Where did I act from wisdom today? And where did I react from fear or desire? Where was I kind and where was I harsh? Where did I contribute to harmony? And where did I create unnecessary conflict? The goal wasn't perfection. It was awareness. By examining patterns honestly, he could make more conscious choices going forward. By acknowledging mistakes without drowning in guilt, he could learn from experience without being paralyzed by regret. Buddha taught a similar practice called right mindfulness of mental formations, observing the intentions and motivations behind your actions with clear comprehension. Are you speaking to be helpful or to appear smart? Are you working to contribute something valuable or to avoid criticism? Are you being generous to express love or to earn approval? This kind of honest self-examination, done with kindness rather than judgment, gradually aligns your actions with your deepest wisdom and compassion. The paradox of selfless service. Here's one of the most counterintuitive discoveries made by all three teachers. The more you focus on serving others' well-being, the more peace and satisfaction you experience. The more you try to grab happiness for yourself alone, the more elusive it becomes. This isn't about self-sacrifice or martyrdom. It's about recognizing that your well-being and others' well-being aren't separate competing interests. They're different aspects of the same reality. When you help that elderly woman in the checkout line, you're not just being nice to her. You're practicing patience, kindness, and presence in a way that develops your own character and peace of mind. When you listen deeply to a friend who's struggling, you're not just supporting them. You're developing empathy, compassion, and the ability to be present with difficulty. Buddha put it beautifully. Hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is eternal rule. But he wasn't just talking about the effect on others. He was talking about the effect on your own mind. When you respond to hostility with hostility, you carry that hostility within yourself. When you respond to hostility with love, you experience the peace of love, virtue in difficult circumstances. It's easy to be virtuous when life is going well, when people are treating you kindly, when you have everything you need. The real test and the real opportunity for growth comes when circumstances are challenging. Marcus Aurelius faced plagues, wars, political betrayal, and personal loss. Instead of using these difficulties as excuses for abandoning his principles, he used them as opportunities to deepen his virtue. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. This wasn't positive thinking or spiritual bypassing. This was a recognition that challenges provide the exact conditions needed to develop strength, wisdom, and compassion. You can't develop patience without encountering situations that test your patience. You can't cultivate courage without facing things that frighten you. You can't deepen your compassion without encountering suffering, both your own and others. Seneca experienced exile, loss of fortune, and eventually execution. Through all of this, he maintained his commitment to living virtuously, not because it guaranteed good outcomes, but because it was the only way to maintain inner peace regardless of external circumstances. Every new thing excites pleasure or pain, he observed, but virtue provides a stability that doesn't depend on constantly changing conditions. The daily practice of virtue. Virtue isn't a grand gesture you make once and then forget about. It's a daily practice of small choices that gradually shape your character and your experience of life. It's choosing to listen fully when someone is speaking to you instead of planning what you'll say next. It's telling the truth in situations where a small lie would be more convenient. It's offering help when you notice someone struggling, even when you're busy. It's maintaining your principles when peer pressure suggests you should compromise them. It's responding to criticism with curiosity rather than defensiveness. It's treating service workers with the same respect you show to important clients. It's giving credit to others when you could claim it for yourself. It's admitting mistakes quickly rather than trying to cover them up. These might seem like small things, but they create the foundation for a life of integrity and inner peace. Each virtuous choice strengthens your capacity for virtue. Each aligned action increases your internal harmony. Each expression of wisdom and compassion develops those qualities within yourself. The integration of inner and outer work. What our three teachers discovered is that you can't separate inner peace from outer virtue, personal serenity from ethical action. They're two aspects of the same reality. The reality of living in alignment with truth and compassion. When you're present and centered within yourself, you naturally act with more wisdom and kindness. When you act with wisdom and kindness, you develop more inner peace and clarity. The practices support each other in an upward spiral of growth and well-being. This is why purely self-focused approaches to inner peace often fall short. They try to develop serenity while ignoring the interconnected nature of existence. And this is why purely outward-focused approaches to ethics often lead to burnout. They try to serve others without developing the inner resources that make service sustainable and joyful. The ancient path integrates both dimensions, cultivating inner awareness and stability, while expressing that awareness through virtuous action in the world. Beginning where you are. You don't have to wait until you're perfectly wise or completely compassionate to begin living more virtuously. You can start exactly where you are, with whatever challenges and opportunities your current life provides. Today, notice the small moments where you have choices between virtue and convenience, between wisdom and reactivity, between kindness and selfishness. In the grocery line at work, with your family, in traffic. These ordinary moments are where character is developed and peace is cultivated. Choose one virtue to focus on for a week. Patience, honesty, generosity, courage. Notice how many opportunities arise to practice this quality, and experiment with what happens when you choose virtue over impulse. Practice the evening reflection. Where did I act from my deepest wisdom today? Where did I react from fear, anger, or desire? What did I learn? How can I bring more virtue to similar situations tomorrow? Most importantly, approach this practice with the same gentle persistence you bring to mindfulness. Virtue isn't about perfection, it's about direction. Every moment offers a fresh opportunity to align your actions with your deepest values. In our next part, we'll explore how this foundation of mindful awareness and virtuous action naturally gives rise to compassion and universal connection, how personal peace becomes a basis for loving service to the world. But for now, simply begin where you are. This moment offers some opportunity to choose wisdom over reactivity, kindness over indifference, courage over comfort. These choices might seem small, but they're the building blocks of both character and peace. As Marcus Aurelius understood, very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. Part 7. Compassion and Universal Connection. Finding peace through service. Imagine you're having one of those days where everything seems to go wrong. You slept through your alarm, spilled coffee on your shirt, got caught in unexpected traffic, and arrive at work to find your computer crashed overnight, taken with the presentation you've been working on for weeks. By 10 a.m., you're feeling stressed, frustrated, and sorry for yourself. Then you get a text from a friend. Her father has just been diagnosed with cancer. Suddenly, your computer problems seem trivial. Your spilled coffee becomes insignificant. Your whole perspective shifts as you realize that while you've been consumed with minor inconveniences, someone you care about is facing a genuinely difficult situation. Something interesting happens in that moment of perspective shift. Your own stress doesn't just decrease. It transforms into something else entirely. You find yourself thinking about what your friend needs, how you might support her, what will be most helpful in this situation. Your self-focused anxiety gives way to other-focused care, and paradoxically, you feel more peaceful than you did when you were trying to solve your own much smaller problems. This is compassion in action, and it reveals one of the most profound discoveries made by Buddha, Marcus Aurelius, and Seneca. Genuine peace isn't found by turning inward and shutting out the world, but by expanding outward and embracing our fundamental connection with all life, the paradox of self-transcendence. All three of our ancient guides discovered the same counterintuitive truth. The more you try to secure happiness and peace for yourself alone, the more elusive they become. But the more you extend genuine care to others, the more inner peace naturally arises. This isn't some mystical principle. It's practical psychology. When you're completely focused on your own problems, worries, and desires, your world becomes very small and your perspective very narrow. Every disappointment feels catastrophic. Every uncertainty feels threatening. Every inconvenience feels personally directed at you. But when you expand your circle of concern to include others' well-being, several things happen simultaneously. Your own problems are put in perspective. Your mental energy is directed toward constructive action rather than anxious rumination, and you experience the natural fulfillment that comes from contributing to something larger than your immediate self-interest. Buddha called this the movement from suffering to service, from grasping to giving, from isolation to interconnection. Marcus Aurelius described it as recognizing that what injures the hive injures the bee, understanding that individual and collective well-being are not separate competing interests, but different aspects of the same reality. Buddha's loving-kindness practice. Buddha developed a systematic practice for cultivating what he called metta, often translated as loving-kindness, but perhaps better understood as unconditional goodwill or benevolent concern for the well-being of all life. The practice begins with yourself, because you can't authentically care for others if you're at war with yourself. But it quickly expands outward in ever-widening circles, from yourself to loved ones, from loved ones to neutral people, from neutral people to difficult people, and finally to all beings everywhere. May I be happy and healthy. May I be peaceful and free from suffering. May I live with ease and well-being. May my loved ones be happy and healthy. May they be peaceful and free from suffering. May they live with ease and well-being. May all neutral people, the cashier at the grocery store, the stranger on the bus, the person I pass on the sidewalk, be happy and healthy. May they be peaceful and free from suffering. May they live with ease and well-being. May even difficult people, those who have hurt me, those whose actions I don't understand, those I find challenging, be happy and healthy. May they be peaceful and free from suffering. May they live with ease and well-being. May all beings everywhere, without exception, be happy and healthy. May all beings be peaceful and free from suffering. May all beings live with ease and well-being. What's remarkable about this practice is how it systematically dissolves the artificial boundaries we create between ourselves and others, between us and them, between those who deserve compassion and those who don't. Marcus Aurelius on universal citizenship. Marcus Aurelius, despite holding ultimate power in the Roman Empire, developed a profound sense of universal citizenship, the recognition that all human beings are members of the same cosmic community, regardless of their nationality, social status, or personal characteristics. We were born to work together, he wrote in his private journal. Even those who frustrate us serve a purpose, like the upper and lower teeth that work in opposition, but accomplish the task of chewing. This was a mere philosophical speculation from Marcus. It was a practical approach to leadership and daily living. When faced with difficult people or challenging situations, he would remind himself that everyone is doing the best they can with their current level of understanding and capability. When you wake up in the morning, he counseled himself, Tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they can't tell good from evil. But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own, not of the same blood or birth, but the same mind, and possessing a share of the divine. This perspective didn't make him naive or permissive. He still had to make difficult decisions and sometimes take firm action, but allowed him to respond to challenges from a place of understanding rather than antagonism, wisdom rather than reactivity. Seneca's philosophy of mutual aid. Seneca, despite his wealth and social position, understood that human beings are fundamentally interdependent. We are all waves in the same ocean, he wrote to his friend Lucilius, seemingly separate but actually parts of one continuous whole. His approach to compassion was remarkably practical. Instead of grand gestures or abstract goodwill, he focused on small, concrete actions that acknowledge and support our interconnectedness with others. He would notice the people who made his daily life possible, the servants who prepared his meals, the workers who maintained his property, the merchants who provided goods and services, and make sure to treat them with respect and appreciation rather than taking their contributions for granted. He practiced what we might call contemplation of interdependence, regularly reflecting on how his own well-being depended on countless other people, most of whom he would never meet. The farmers who grew his food, the craftspeople who made his clothes, the builders who constructed his home, the countless individuals whose work and care made his life possible. This contemplation naturally generated gratitude and humility, but also created a sense of responsibility. If his well-being depended on others' contributions, then he had an obligation to contribute to collective well-being in whatever ways he could. The neuroscience of compassion. Modern neuroscience has confirmed what our ancient guides discovered through direct experience. Compassion and kindness literally change your brain in ways that increase well-being and resilience. When you engage in acts of kindness or extend genuine care to others, your brain releases oxytocin, dopamine, and serotonin, neurochemicals associated with bonding, pleasure, and mood regulation. Your stress hormones decrease, your immune system strengthens, and your overall sense of well-being increases. But perhaps more importantly, regular compassion practice literally rewires your brain. The neural pathways associated with empathy, emotional regulation, and positive emotion become stronger and more easily activated. The default mode network, the brain circuits associated with self-referential thinking and rumination, becomes less dominant. In other words, the more you practice extending care to others, the more natural it becomes and the more peaceful you feel. Compassion is both a cause and effect of inner peace. Compassion for difficult people. One of the most challenging but transformative aspects of compassion practice involves extending genuine care to people who are difficult, unpleasant, or who have caused you harm. This doesn't mean becoming a doormat or failing to set appropriate boundaries. It means recognizing the common humanity, even in people whose behavior is problematic. Buddha taught that everyone who acts harmfully is suffering in some way. Hurt people. As the modern saying goes, this doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it provides a framework for responding to it with wisdom rather than reactive anger. Marcus Aurelius practiced this regularly with the difficult people he encountered in political life. Remember that very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. When someone wrongs you, consider, what notion of good or evil do they have in doing this? Once you understand that, you'll feel pity rather than outrage or anger. Seneca approached difficult people with what we might call compassionate boundaries, maintaining his own integrity and protecting his own well-being, while still holding space for the possibility that even challenging people are capable of growth and change. Every person you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about, he observed. Be kind, but also be wise. Extend care, but also maintain your principles. The Bodhisattva ideal. Buddhist tradition developed the concept of the Bodhisattva, someone who dedicates their life to the liberation and well-being of all beings. While this might sound like an impossibly lofty ideal, it's actually a very practical approach to finding meaning and peace in daily life. The Bodhisattva recognizes that their own peace and everyone else's peace are intimately connected. Instead of seeking enlightenment for themselves alone, they understand that genuine awakening naturally expresses itself through service to others. This doesn't require grand gestures or dramatic sacrifices. It can be as simple as bringing full presence to your interactions with others, offering genuine help when you notice someone struggling, or maintaining patience and kindness in situations where irritation would be more natural. The Bodhisattva ideal transforms every encounter into an opportunity for practice, every challenge into a chance to develop compassion, every moment into a possibility for contributing to collective well-being. Practical compassion in daily life. Compassion isn't just a feeling or an attitude. It's a way of engaging with the world that can be cultivated through specific practices and approaches. The practice of genuine listening. When someone is speaking to you, practice giving them your complete attention. Don't plan your response, judge their perspective, or mentally multitask. Simply receive what they're saying with full presence. This quality of attention is itself a form of compassion. It communicates that they matter, that their experience is worthy of respect. The practice of helpful action. Look for small, concrete ways to make other people's lives easier or more pleasant. Hold doors. Offer assistance with heavy packages. Let someone merge in traffic. Share useful information. Express appreciation for good service. These actions might seem minor, but they contribute to a more compassionate world. The practice of patient understanding. When someone is being difficult or unpleasant, take a moment to consider what might be causing their behavior. Are they stressed, afraid, hurt, or overwhelmed? This doesn't excuse inappropriate behavior, but it allows you to respond from understanding rather than automatic reactivity. The practice of generous interpretation. When someone's actions or words are ambiguous, choose to interpret them in the most charitable way possible. Instead of assuming negative motives, consider positive explanations. Instead of taking things personally, recognize that most people's behavior is about their own internal state rather than their feelings about you. Compassion and boundaries. One common misconception about compassion is that it requires you to be endlessly accommodating or to sacrifice your own needs for others. Our three ancient guides understood that genuine compassion sometimes requires setting firm boundaries, saying no, or taking action that others might not appreciate in the moment. Marcus Aurelius had to make difficult decisions that affected millions of people. He couldn't please everyone, but he could ensure that his decisions were made from a place of care for the common good rather than personal interest or political convenience. Seneca sometimes had to withdraw his support from people whose behavior was destructive to themselves or others. He understood that enabling harmful behavior is not compassionate. It's actually a form of cruelty disguised as kindness. Buddha regularly challenged his students' assumptions and pushed them out of their comfort zones. He understood that true compassion sometimes looks like tough love, refusing to collude with someone's self-destructive patterns, even when they would prefer that you do so. Compassionate boundaries involve saying, I care about your well-being, which is why I cannot support this behavior, or I want to help, but not in a way that makes the situation worse, or I wish you well, but I need to protect my own mental health by limiting our interaction. The ripple effects of compassion. When you practice genuine compassion consistently, something remarkable happens. It spreads. Your kindness inspires others to be more kind. Your patience encourages others to be more patient. Your generous interpretation of difficult situations models a different way of responding to challenges. This isn't guaranteed. Some people will take advantage of kindness, misinterpret compassion as weakness, or fail to reciprocate care. But over time, authentic compassion tends to create what sociologists call prosocial contagion, the tendency for positive behaviors to spread through social networks. More importantly, for your own inner peace, compassion practice gradually transforms your default way of relating to the world. Instead of approaching each day defensively, expecting problems, and preparing for conflict, you begin to approach life with openness, curiosity, and goodwill. This doesn't make you naive or vulnerable. Wise compassion includes discernment and appropriate self-protection. But it does create a foundation of inner peace that isn't dependent on everyone around you behaving perfectly. Universal connection in ordinary moments. The most profound experiences of universal connection often happen in the most ordinary circumstances. Sharing a smile with a stranger, helping someone who's struggling, feeling genuine appreciation for the postal worker who brings your mail, experiencing a moment of common humanity with someone very different from yourself. These moments remind us that beneath all the surface differences, cultural, racial, economic, political, we share the same basic hopes and fears, the same desire to be happy and avoid suffering, the same fundamental vulnerability and resilience that characterizes human life. Marcus Aurelius experiences regularly. At dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, I have to go to work. As a human being, what do I have to complain of? If I'm going to do what I was born for, the things I was brought into the world to do, his work wasn't just ruling an empire. It was participating in the great human project of creating more wisdom, justice, and compassion in the world. Your work, whatever form it takes, is part of that same project, beginning with yourself. Genuine compassion for others must begin with compassion for yourself. If you're constantly self-critical, judgmental about your own mistakes, or harsh with your own imperfections, you'll find it difficult to extend authentic care to others. Practice speaking to yourself the way you would speak to a good friend who is struggling. Notice your internal commentary and choose kindness over criticism. Forgive yourself for past mistakes and focus on what you can learn rather than what you did wrong. This isn't self-indulgence or making excuses for poor behavior. It's the recognition that inner harshness creates outer harshness, while inner kindness creates the foundation for outer kindness. As you develop genuine self-compassion, extending that same quality of care to others becomes natural rather than forced, authentic rather than performed. In our next part, we'll explore how accepting life's impermanence, the inevitable changes and losses that are part of every human life, becomes another pathway to peace rather than a source of anxiety. But for now, simply begin where you are. Look for one opportunity today to extend genuine care to another person. Notice how it affects not just them, but your own sense of peace and connection. As Buddha discovered, we are all interconnected waves in the same ocean of existence. When we act from that recognition, both individual and collective well-being naturally flourish. Part 8. Accepting life's impermanence. Making peace with change and loss. Sarah sits in her childhood bedroom, packing up the last of her father's belongings. He passed away 3 months ago, and she's finally ready to sort through his things. As she holds his favorite coffee mug, the one he used every morning for 20 years, she's struck by how ordinary it looks now, how powerless contain the memories and love it once held. She finds his reading glasses folded carefully on a nightstand, still holding the impression of his nose, his calendar with appointments he'll never keep, his unfinished crossword puzzle, forever stuck at 17 across. Each item tells a story of a life interrupted, plans unfulfilled, conversations that will never happen. The grief comes in waves, but mixed with something unexpected, a profound appreciation for the time they had together. The Sunday morning breakfast, the long walks, the terrible jokes he told that made her laugh despite herself. These moments feel more precious now precisely because she knows they cannot be repeated, more beautiful because they were temporary. This is a paradox that Buddha, Marcus Aurelius, and Seneca all discovered through their own encounters with loss and change. The very impermanence that makes life painful is also what makes it meaningful. The fact that nothing lasts forever is not life's cruelest joke. It's life's deepest invitation to presence, appreciation, and love. The first noble truth revisited. We began this journey by exploring Buddha's first noble truth, that life contains inevitable suffering. But Buddha's insight was more subtle than simply observing that bad things happen. He saw that our suffering comes primarily from our resistance to the fundamental nature of existence. Everything changes. Nothing remains the same forever, and every form we love will eventually be lost. We suffer not because we lose things, but because we expect to keep them. We suffer not because situations change, but because we want them to stay the same. We suffer not because people die, but because we cannot accept that death is an integral part of life. Buddha called this resistance to impermanence attachment, not the love we feel for people and things, but our desperate attempt to make permanent what is inherently temporary. It's the difference between appreciating a sunset and trying to prevent night from coming. It's the difference between loving someone deeply and being unable to let them grow and change. When Sarah holds her father's coffee mug, she has two choices. She can resist the reality of his absence, making the mug a shrine to what can never be again, letting it become a source of continued pain. Or she can accept the impermanence while honoring the love, treasuring the memory of countless morning conversations without demanding that they continue forever. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor's mortality practice. Marcus Aurelius faced impermanence on multiple levels. As emperor, he watched the rise and fall of political alliances, the constant change in public opinion, the temporary nature of power and status. As a father, he lost several children to disease and accident. As a human being, he lived with the daily awareness that he too would die. Rather than avoiding thoughts of mortality, he developed what we might call a mortality practice, regularly contemplating the temporary nature of all things as a way of staying present and maintaining perspective. Very little is needed to make a happy life, he wrote. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. But he also wrote, remember that in a little while you and everyone you know will be dead. Soon even your name will be forgotten. This wasn't morbid pessimism. It was liberation. When you truly accept that everything is temporary, including your own life, you stop wasting energy trying to make permanent what cannot be preserved. Instead, you can focus on what actually matters, how you respond to what's happening right now, the love you express today, the kindness you offer in this moment. Marcus would remind himself each morning. When you wake up, consider that you might not live to see evening. When evening comes, don't assume you'll see morning. Always be ready, always be present, always be grateful for whatever time you have. This practice didn't make him reckless or careless. Quite the opposite. When you truly understand that time is limited, you become more intentional about how you spend it. You argue less about trivial things. You express appreciation more freely. You prioritize what truly matters over what merely seems urgent. Seneca's philosophy of voluntary loss. Seneca developed perhaps the most practical approach to working with impermanence. Having experienced tremendous wealth and devastating loss multiple times, he understood that clinging to good fortune creates anxiety, while accepting loss creates freedom. He practiced what he called voluntary poverty, periodically living as if he lost everything, eating simple food, wearing plain clothes, sleeping on hard surfaces. This wasn't masochism or rejection of pleasure. It was training for resilience and gratitude. Every new thing excites pleasure or pain, he observed. But if we practice letting go of good fortune before it's taken from us, we can enjoy it more fully while we have it and suffer less when it changes. Seneca also practiced what we might call premeditation of loss, not dwelling morbidly on potential disasters, but occasionally imagining how he would respond if various losses occurred. How would he handle financial ruin? How would he cope with the death of loved ones? How would he face his own mortality? This practice served two purposes. It helped him develop emotional resilience for actual losses when they occurred, and increased his appreciation for what he currently had. When you kiss your child goodnight, he wrote to Lucilius, remember that they are mortal. This awareness doesn't diminish your love, it intensifies it. The Buddhist understanding of non-attachment. Buddha's teaching on non-attachment is often misunderstood as emotional withdrawal or indifference. But non-attachment isn't about loving less. It's about loving without clinging, appreciating without grasping, caring without demanding that things remain unchanged. Think of how you hold a soap bubble. If you grip it tightly, try and preserve it forever, it pops immediately. But if you hold it gently, with open palms, you can appreciate its beauty for as long as it naturally lasts. Non-attachment is like holding life with open palms, fully engaged but not desperately controlling. Buddha distinguished between two types of love. Attachment love, which says, I love you, therefore you must not change or leave. And compassion love, which says, I love you, therefore I want whatever is truly best for you, even if that means growing beyond our current relationship. Attachment love creates suffering because it demands that the dynamic, ever-changing reality of life conform to our static preferences. Compassion love creates peace because it aligns with life as it actually is rather than as we wish it were. When Sarah sorts through her father's belongings, she's practicing non-attachment. She's honoring their relationship without demanding that it continue in its previous form. She's treasuring the memories without insisting that new ones be created. She's loving him fully while accepting that he's gone. The seasons of life. All three teachers use the metaphor of seasons to understand impermanence. Just as we don't expect spring flowers to bloom in winter or summer warmth to last through autumn, we can learn to accept the natural cycles of human experience. Childhood gives way to adolescence, adolescence to adulthood, adulthood to old age. Health alternates with illness. Prosperity alternates with challenge. Joy alternates with sorrow. Relationships begin, flourish, and sometimes end. Nothing remains static because change is the fundamental characteristic of existence. When we resist these natural cycles, we create suffering. When we accept them while appreciating whatever season we're currently experiencing, we find peace even in difficult transitions. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Observe constantly that all things take place by change. Be accustomed to consider that the nature of the universe loves nothing so much as to change the things which are." This doesn't mean becoming passive or fatalistic. It means understanding that our power lies not in preventing change, but in choosing how we respond to it. We cannot stop winter from coming, but we can prepare for it. We cannot prevent aging, but we can age gracefully. We cannot avoid loss, but we can grieve with dignity and love. Finding meaning in transience. One of the most beautiful discoveries made by all three teachers is that meaning doesn't require permanence. In fact, the temporary nature of experiences often makes them more meaningful, not less. The cherry blossoms that bloom for only 2 weeks each spring are more treasured than plastic flowers that never change. The conversation with a friend visiting from far away is more precious than daily small talk. The sunset you watch from a mountaintop is more moving than a painting that hangs in your living room forever. Impermanence creates urgency, but not the anxious kind, the loving kind. When you know something is temporary, you pay attention to it more fully. You appreciate it more deeply. You're more present with it while it lasts. Seneca expresses beautifully, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. Life is long enough if you know how to use it." The key insight is that depth of experience matters more than duration. A moment of complete presence and appreciation can be more fulfilling than years of distracted existence. A brief but genuine connection can be more meaningful than decades of superficial interaction. The grief that heals. All three teachers understood that grief is not a problem to be solved, but a natural response to loss that, when fully experienced, leads to healing and wisdom. Buddha didn't teach that enlightened beings don't grieve. He taught that they grieve without resistance, allowing a natural process of loss and recovery to unfold without adding mental commentary about how they should be feeling. Marcus Aurelius grieved the loss of his children and closest advisors, but he grieved without bitterness, without demanding that the universe explain itself, without closing his heart to prevent future pain. Seneca wrote movingly about the death of friends and the losses that come with aging, but he wrote from acceptance rather than resentment, finding ways to honor what was lost while remaining open to whatever might come next. They discovered that grief, when fully felt and not resisted, naturally transforms into gratitude. The pain of loss becomes appreciation for what was shared. The sadness of ending becomes celebration of what was experienced. The emptiness of absence becomes fullness of memory and love. Practical approaches to impermanence. The daily awareness practice. Each morning, remind yourself that this day will never come again. The people you'll interact with are constantly changing. The circumstances of your life are temporary. This awareness can make ordinary moments feel more precious and significant. The gratitude for the temporary. Instead of taking ongoing good things for granted, regularly appreciate their impermanent nature. Your health won't last forever. Appreciate it today. Your relationships are constantly evolving. Treasure them as they are now. Your current phase of life has its own unique gifts. Notice them while they're available. The practice of letting go. When you find yourself clinging to how things used to be or demanding that they remain unchanged, practice conscious release. This doesn't mean not caring. It means care without controlling, loving without possessing. The legacy reflection. Regularly consider what will remain after you're gone, not in a morbid way, but as guidance for how to live now. What impact do you want to have? What love do you want to express? What contribution do you want to make? The awareness of your own mortality can inspire more intentional living, preparing for major transitions. Life contains predictable major transitions: graduation, marriage, career changes, parenthood, aging parents, retirement, health challenges, death of loved ones. Instead of waiting until these transitions arrive, we can prepare for them mentally and emotionally. This preparation doesn't involve detailed planning for every contingency. That's impossible and creates its own anxiety. Rather, it involves developing the internal resources that support resilience, the capacity to adapt, the ability to find meaning in difficulty, the skill of accepting what cannot be changed while taking action where action is possible. Marcus Aurelius prepared for political upheavals by regularly reflecting on the temporary nature of power and status. Seneca prepared for financial loss by occasionally living simply and discovering that he could be happy with very little. Buddha prepared his followers for his own death by teaching them to rely on their own wisdom rather than external authority. The acceptance that liberates. The deepest acceptance of impermanence isn't resignation or defeat, it's liberation. When you truly understand that everything changes, you stop wasting energy trying to freeze life in preferred configurations. When you fully accept that loss is inevitable, you stop living in constant fear of what might be taken away. This acceptance allows you to engage more fully with life as it actually is rather than as you wish it were. You can love deeply without needing guarantees. You can invest yourself fully in projects that might fail. You can form meaningful relationships with people who will eventually die or grow beyond your current connection. Sarah, packing her father's belongings, experiences his liberation by accepting his death fully, not just intellectually but emotionally. She becomes free to honor their relationship without being trapped by it, to carry his love forward without being frozen in grief. The paradox of permanent impermanence. Here's the final paradox that our three teachers discovered. The one thing that never changes is that everything changes. Impermanence itself is permanent. This understanding becomes a kind of refuge, not because it eliminates loss, but because it provides a framework for making sense of loss. When you align yourself with impermanence rather than fighting against it, you align yourself with the fundamental nature of existence. You stop swimming upstream against the current of life and learn to navigate skillfully within its natural flow. This doesn't make you passive. It makes you responsive. It doesn't make you indifferent. It makes you wise. It doesn't eliminate pain. It eliminates unnecessary suffering. In our next part, we'll explore how all these insights, mindfulness, virtue, compassion, and acceptance of impermanence, come together in daily practices that support sustained peace and wisdom. But for now, simply notice the impermanence that surrounds you, the changing light throughout the day, the aging of your body, the evolution of your relationships, the coming and going of thoughts and emotions. Instead of resisting these changes, try appreciating them as expressions of life's dynamic vitality. As Marcus Aurelius understood, loss is nothing else but change, and change is nature's delight. When you align with nature rather than fighting it, even loss becomes a teacher, even change becomes a gift, even impermanence becomes a source of peace. Part 9. Daily Practices for Sustained Peace. Building Habits of Wisdom. The alarm rings at 6:30 a.m., and Michael's mind immediately begins racing. Today's presentation to the board. The quarterly numbers that don't look as good as hoped. The difficult conversation he needs to have with his teenage daughter about her grades. His mother's upcoming surgery next week. Before his feet even touch the floor, anxiety has already colonized his consciousness. But then he remembers something Marcus Aurelius wrote nearly 2,000 years ago. When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, "The people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they can't tell good from evil. But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and I recognize that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own." Instead of reaching immediately for his phone to check emails and news, Michael takes 3 deep breaths. He places his hands on his chest and feels his heartbeat, steady, reliable, present. This simple act grounds him in his body, rather than letting him be swept away by mental projections about the day ahead. This is what we mean by daily practice. Not grand gestures or dramatic spiritual experiences, but small, consistent habits that align us with wisdom rather than reactivity, presence rather than anxiety, acceptance rather than resistance. Buddha, Marcus Aurelius, and Seneca didn't achieve inner peace through occasional insights or weekend retreats. They developed sustained tranquility through daily disciplines, simple practices repeated consistently until they became as natural as breathing. The Morning Foundation, Marcus Aurelius's Dawn Reflection. Marcus Aurelius understood that how you begin your day largely determines how you'll move through it. Before dealing with the external world's demands, he established his internal orientation through what he called his morning meditations. These weren't lengthy spiritual practices requiring special equipment or perfect conditions. They were practical reflections he could do anywhere, in his tent during military campaigns, in his palace chambers, even while walking to early morning meetings. His morning practice had 4 essential elements: perspective, intention, acceptance, and gratitude. Perspective meant reminding himself of what actually mattered versus what merely seemed urgent. Remember that very little is needed to make a happy life, he would tell himself. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. This wasn't positive thinking or denial. It was choosing to focus on what he could actually influence rather than being overwhelmed by everything beyond his control. Intention involved setting his ethical compass for the day, not just planning what tasks to accomplish, but clarifying how he wanted to show up in the world. Today I escaped anxiety. Or no, I discarded it because it was within me and my own perceptions, not outside. He would consciously choose his character for the day. Patient rather than irritable, curious rather than judgmental, generous rather than selfish. Acceptance meant preparing mentally for difficulty without becoming pessimistic. The universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it. He would remind himself that challenges were inevitable, that people would sometimes disappoint him, that plans would need to change. This preparation wasn't about expecting the worst. It was about building resilience for whatever actually occurred. Gratitude concluded his morning reflection by appreciating what he already had rather than focusing on what was missing. Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. He would mentally review the gifts in his life: his ability to reason, his relationships, his capacity to serve others, even his challenges as opportunities for growth. Modern practitioners can adapt Marcus's approach. Spend 5 to 10 minutes each morning before checking your phone or engaging with external demands. Set your intention for who you want to be today. Prepare mentally for likely challenges and appreciate what you already have. The breath of presence, Buddha's mindful breathing. While Marcus focused on philosophical reflection, Buddha emphasized direct awareness of present moment experience through mindful breathing. This practice serves as an anchor that you can return to throughout the day whenever you notice your mind has been hijacked by worry, regret, anger, or any other form of suffering. The beauty of breath awareness is its simplicity and availability. You're always breathing, so you always have access to this refuge from mental turbulence. You don't need special conditions, equipment, or extended time periods. You can practice mindful breathing while walking to meetings, waiting in line, listening to others, or transitioning between activities. Buddha taught that mindful breathing has 4 levels of deepening awareness. Level 1, simply noticing, becoming aware that you're breathing without trying to change it, just observing the natural rhythm of inhalation and exhalation. This basic noticing interrupts autopilot living and brings you into present moment awareness. Level 2, following the full cycle, paying attention to the complete breath cycle, the beginning of inhalation, the peak of fullness, the beginning of exhalation, the pause before the next breath begins. This deeper attention calms the nervous system and develops concentration. Level 3, observing effects, noticing how breathing affects your body and mind. How does your chest feel during deep inhalation? What happens to your shoulders during slow exhalation? How does focusing on breath change your mental state? This awareness develops insight into the mind-body connection. Level 4, breath as refuge. Using breath awareness as a sanctuary whenever you're overwhelmed by thoughts or emotions. Instead of being consumed by anxiety about the future or regret about the past, you can always come home to this breath, this moment, this life as it actually is right now. The practice isn't about achieving perfect concentration or stopping all thoughts. It's about having somewhere to return when you notice your mind has wandered into suffering. Each time you remember to come back to your breath, you strengthen your capacity for presence and weaken your habit of mental reactivity. The evening inventory, Seneca's nightly review. While morning practices prepare us for the day ahead, evening practices help us learn from the day that's ending. Seneca developed what he called his evening examination, a gentle but honest review of his actions, reactions, and choices from the day just completed. When a lamp is taken away and my wife has fallen silent, I examine the entire day and measure my deeds and words, hiding nothing from myself, passing nothing by. For why should I fear any of my mistakes when I can say, watch out that you don't do it again, but now I forgive you? Seneca's evening review had 4 components: recognition, reflection, learning, and release. Recognition involved honestly acknowledging what actually happened during the day, not the story he preferred about his behavior, but what really occurred. When did he lose his temper? When did he act from wisdom versus reactivity? When did he choose virtue versus convenience? This wasn't harsh self-criticism, but clear-eyed honesty. Reflection meant understanding why he acted as he did, what triggered his impatience, what circumstances brought out his best qualities, what patterns could he notice in his reactions. This reflection developed self-knowledge, which is a foundation of self-improvement. Learning involved identifying specific insights or adjustments for the future, not vague resolutions like be more patient, but concrete awareness like I get irritated when I'm hungry and rushed, so I should eat lunch before scheduling difficult conversations. Release concluded the practice by forgiving himself for mistakes and appreciating what went well. I forgive you, he would tell himself. Recognizing that self-compassion is more motivating than self-criticism for actual change. This evening practice serves multiple purposes. It prevents unconscious repetition of harmful patterns. It increases appreciation for positive choices. And it processes a day's experiences so they don't create mental residue that disturbs sleep. Modern adaptation. Spend 5 to 10 minutes before bed reviewing your day with gentle honesty. What went well? What was challenging? What can you learn? What are you grateful for? Then consciously release the day and prepare for rest. The discipline of gratitude, appreciating what is. All 3 teachers understood that gratitude is not just a nice feeling, but an essential practice for maintaining peace and perspective. Gratitude shifts attention from what's missing to what's present, from problems to possibilities, from scarcity to abundance. But they practice gratitude as a discipline, not just a sentiment. They deliberately trained their minds to notice and appreciate what was already available rather than always focusing on what was lacking or needed improvement. Marcus Aurelius practiced systematic gratitude by regularly reviewing different categories of appreciation: his relationships, his abilities, his circumstances, even his challenges as opportunities for growth. Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. Buddha taught that gratitude naturally arises from present moment awareness. When you're fully present with any experience, even difficult ones, you often discover unexpected gifts. The strength you didn't know you had, the support that was always available, the beauty that exists even in challenging circumstances. Seneca practiced gratitude as preparation for loss. By regularly appreciating what he had, he could enjoy it more fully while it lasted and suffer less when it changed. Every new thing excites pleasure or pain, but the man who has experienced many ups and downs learns to be grateful for the UPS without being destroyed by the downs. A practical gratitude discipline might include morning gratitude. Begin each day by appreciating 3 specific things, not just generic blessings, but particular gifts available today: the comfortable bed you slept in, the clean water you can drink, the people who care about you, your capacity to see and hear and think. Transitional gratitude. Between activities throughout the day, pause briefly to appreciate something about the experience you're leaving: a pleasant conversation, a task completed, a moment of beauty you noticed, even a difficult situation that taught you something. Evening gratitude. Before sleep, review the day for experiences, people, or opportunities you can appreciate. This practice helps you fall asleep with a peaceful mind focused on abundance rather than worry or regret. Challenge gratitude. When facing difficulties, look for hidden gifts: the strength you're developing, the compassion you're learning, the priorities that are becoming clearer, the support you're discovering. The integration challenge, making practice sustainable. The greatest challenge isn't learning these practices, it's maintaining them consistently. All 3 teachers face this difficulty and develop strategies for building sustainable habits of wisdom. Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations not as a book for others, but as personal reminders to maintain his own practice. He knew that without consistent reinforcement, he would drift back into reactivity and anxiety despite all his philosophical knowledge. Buddha emphasized that enlightenment isn't a permanent achievement, but an ongoing practice. Even experienced practitioners need to return regularly to basic awareness practices because the mind's tendency toward distraction and suffering is persistent. Seneca acknowledged that maintaining philosophical principles during easy times was relatively simple, but that real practice was tested during difficulty, stress, and challenge. He developed practices specifically designed to maintain wisdom under pressure. Their insights about sustainable practice include: start small. Don't try to implement elaborate routines. Begin with 5 minutes of morning reflection, or 3 conscious breaths before meals, or 1 minute of evening gratitude. Consistency matters more than duration. Link to existing habits. Attach new practices to activities you already do regularly. Practice gratitude while brushing your teeth. Use breath awareness while commuting. Do evening reflection while preparing for bed. Expect inconsistency. You'll forget, get busy, lose motivation. This is normal, not failure. The practice is returning to your practices when you notice you've drifted away, not maintaining them perfectly. Adapt to circumstances. Your practice will look different during busy periods, travel, illness, or major life changes. The key is maintaining some form of conscious intention rather than abandoning practice entirely when conditions aren't ideal. Find your rhythm. Some people are naturally drawn to morning practices, others to evening ones. Some prefer reflection, others prefer breath awareness. Experiment to discover what actually helps you maintain peace and perspective. The community of practice. While inner peace is ultimately an individual achievement, it's supported by community. All 3 teachers had relationships with others committed to similar practices. Philosophical communities that supported each other's growth and provided accountability for maintaining wisdom practices. Marcus Aurelius corresponded with other Stoic philosophers and surrounded himself with advisors who shared his commitment to virtue and wisdom. Buddha established a community, Sangha, of practitioners who supported each other's spiritual development. Seneca maintained friendships with others pursuing philosophical life and wrote letters to fellow students of wisdom. Modern practitioners can cultivate community by finding others interested in contemplative practices, joining meditation groups, reading philosophical works with friends, or simply sharing with family members your commitment to living more consciously and asking for their support. The ripple effect of daily practice. When you maintain consistent practices for cultivating inner peace, the effect extends far beyond your personal well-being. Your increased presence makes you a better listener. Your emotional stability provides security for others during difficult times. Your acceptance of what cannot be changed models resilience. Your gratitude for what you have encourages others to notice their own blessings. Marcus Aurelius discovered that his personal philosophical practice made him a better emperor, more patient with difficult advisors, more clear-thinking during crises, more compassionate towards subjects facing hardship. Buddha found that his inner peace created space for others to discover their own wisdom. His presence itself became a teaching that inspired countless others to pursue awakening. Seneca learned that maintaining equanimity during his own challenges helped friends and family navigate their difficulties with greater courage and perspective. This is the ultimate gift of daily practice. It doesn't just create peace for you, it contributes to peace in the world. Every person who responds to difficulty with wisdom rather than reactivity makes the world slightly more peaceful. Every individual who approaches others with compassion rather than judgment makes human community more harmonious. The practices themselves are simple: morning reflection, mindful breathing, evening review, disciplined gratitude. But their effects compound over time, creating not just a moment of peace, but a peaceful way of being that remains stable even during challenging circumstances. In our final part, we'll explore how all these elements come together: the understanding, the acceptance, the practices, to create a life of integrated wisdom and unshakable serenity. But for now, the invitation is simple. Choose one small practice and begin today. Not tomorrow when conditions are better, not next week when you have more time, but right now with whatever circumstances you're facing. As Seneca wisely observed, every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end. Let the end of old patterns of reactivity and anxiety become the beginning of new habits of wisdom and peace. Part 10. The Peaceful Life Integrated. Living with Unshakable Serenity. The same alarm rings at 6:30 a.m., but Michael's response is entirely different now. 6 months of daily practice have transformed not the circumstances of his life, but his relationship to them. The quarterly numbers still aren't what he hoped. His daughter still struggles with school. His mother's health remains uncertain. The external world continues its dance of change, challenge, and unpredictability. But something fundamental has shifted. As his feet touch the floor, Michael's first awareness isn't problems to solve, but a breath entering his lungs. Not of anxiety about the future, but of gratitude for another day of consciousness. Not of resistance to whatever difficulties await, but a curiosity about how he might respond to them with wisdom rather than reactivity. He sits quietly for 5 minutes, not to escape the day ahead, but to prepare for it skillfully. He sets his intention to listen deeply, to respond rather than react, to remember that every person he encounters is struggling with their own version of the human condition. He prepares mentally for likely challenges while releasing attachment to specific outcomes. He appreciates what he has while remaining open to whatever changes may come. This is what integration looks like. Not the elimination of life's difficulties, but the cultivation of inner resources that remain stable regardless of external circumstances. Not the achievement of a perfect life, but the development of a peaceful response to an imperfect world. The transformation of ordinary moments. When Buddha, Marcus Aurelius, and Seneca spoke of inner peace, they weren't describing mystical experiences or extraordinary states of consciousness. They were pointing to a fundamental shift in how we inhabit ordinary moments, how we drink morning coffee, how we listen to colleagues, how we respond to traffic jams, how we process disappointing news. The integrated life doesn't require dramatic changes in schedule, location, or circumstances. It requires a different quality of attention, presence, and response within whatever circumstances already exist. Consider Michael's morning commute. 6 months ago, this time was consumed by mental rehearsals of his presentation, analysis of company politics, frustration with slow traffic, and half listening to anxiety-provoking news. His body was in the car, but his mind was scattered across past regrets and future worries, creating internal stress that had nothing to do with actual present moment reality. Now, the same commute becomes an opportunity for practice. He begins with 3 conscious breaths, feeling his connection to the physical experience of being alive. He notices the quality of light, the changing sky, the simple miracle of thousands of people navigating complex traffic patterns with remarkable cooperation and skill. When anxiety about the day ahead arises, he doesn't resist it or indulge it. He notices it with the same gentle awareness he brings to watching clouds pass through the sky, acknowledging its presence without being consumed by its content. He returns his attention to the present moment. The feeling of hands on the steering wheel, the sound of the engine, the immediate task of driving safely. This isn't distraction or avoidance. It's the recognition that this moment is the only one that actually exists, and therefore the only place where peace, wisdom, or effectiveness can be found. The alchemy of difficult emotions. Perhaps the most profound integration occurs in how we relate to challenging emotions. Before developing a contemplative practice, difficult feelings typically hijack our entire experience. Anger makes us angry people. Sadness makes us sad people. Anxiety makes us anxious people. We become identified with whatever emotional weather is passing through our inner landscape. The wisdom traditions offer a radically different approach. Emotions are temporary experiences, not permanent identities. They arise, peak, and dissolve according to their own natural rhythm. Our job isn't to eliminate them or be overwhelmed by them, but to maintain awareness that's larger than any particular emotional state. Marcus Aurelius faced this challenge when dealing with incompetent subordinates, political opponents, and personal losses. Rather than pretending not to feel frustrated, disappointed, or grieved, he learned to experience these emotions without being consumed by them. You have power over your mind, not outside events, he reminded himself. Realize this, and you'll find strength. This wasn't about controlling emotions, but about maintaining perspective while feeling them fully. Buddha's approach was similar, but emphasized the impermanent nature of all mental states. This too shall pass wasn't just philosophical consolation, but practical instruction. By observing emotions with mindful awareness rather than reactive identification, he discovered that even intense states naturally dissolve when neither resisted nor fed by mental elaboration. Seneca developed perhaps the most practical approach by distinguishing between initial emotional reactions, which are involuntary and natural, and our secondary responses to those reactions, which are chosen and character-forming. You cannot prevent the initial feeling, he observed, but you can choose what to do with it. The first movement of emotion is not under our control, but the second movement, our response to the response, determines who we become. For Michael, this integration manifests during his challenging conversation with his daughter about her grades. 6 months ago, her defensive responses would have triggered his own defensiveness, escalating into the familiar pattern of mutual frustration and damaged connection. Now, when he feels that familiar irritation rising, he doesn't suppress it or judge himself for having it. He notices it with compassionate awareness. Ah, there's the frustration. It makes sense. I care about her future and feel helpless when she seems not to care about it herself. But instead of speaking from that frustration, he pauses. He takes a breath. He remembers that she's struggling too, that her defensive behavior comes from her own anxiety and feelings of inadequacy. He responds from understanding rather than reactivity. This seems really hard for you. Can you help me understand what's making school feel so difficult right now? The conversation that follows is entirely different, not because the external situation changed, but because his internal response transformed the entire dynamic. The wisdom of skillful action. Integration doesn't mean becoming passive or withdrawn from life's challenges. All three teachers were deeply engaged with the world around them. Marcus as an emperor managing an empire, Buddha as a teacher guiding thousands of students, Seneca as an advisor influencing political decisions that affected millions of people. But their engagement was skillful rather than reactive. They acted from clarity rather than confusion, from wisdom rather than impulse, from compassion rather than self-interest. Skillful action has several characteristics that distinguish it from mere activity. Presence-based. Instead of acting automatically from habit or emotional reactivity, skillful action emerges from present moment awareness of what's actually needed in each situation. Values aligned. Rather than being driven by immediate desires or external pressures, skillful action is guided by deeply held principles about what constitutes a good life and beneficial behavior. Outcome independent. While skillful action is purposeful and thoughtful, it doesn't depend on achieving specific results. You act rightly because rightness itself is valuable, not because you can guarantee particular outcomes. Adaptive. Skillful action responds to the uniqueness of each situation rather than applying rigid rules or formulas. It requires wisdom, judgment, and sensitivity to context. For Michael, this manifests in how he approaches his presentation to the board. Previously, he would have been consumed by anxiety about their reception, spending enormous mental energy trying to control their responses and protect his reputation. Now, he prepares thoroughly, not from anxiety but from respect for his responsibilities and care for the company's well-being. He presents clearly and honestly, including both positive developments and areas of concern. He responds to questions thoughtfully rather than defensively, but his sense of success or failure doesn't depend on their immediate reactions. He knows he's done his best with integrity and competence. Their response is their response, influenced by factors beyond his control, including their own pressures, biases, and concerns. This doesn't make him indifferent to outcomes. He cares deeply about the company's success and his contribution to it. But his caring is balanced by acceptance. He can want things to go well without demanding that they must go well, without his peace of mind depending on variables beyond his influence. The practice of deep listening. One of the most practical applications of inner peace is the capacity for genuine listening. When your mind isn't consumed by internal commentary, defense of your position, or preparation of your next response, you can actually hear what others are saying. Not just their words, but their underlying concerns, hopes, and struggles. This quality of attention is profoundly healing for relationships. Most people feel chronically unheard, misunderstood, rushed through conversations that remain at surface levels. When you offer the gift of complete presence, you create space for authentic connection and mutual understanding. Michael discovers this during what could have been a routine meeting with his team. Previously, He would have been mentally multitasking, listening partially while also thinking about the next agenda item, evaluating people's comments, planning his responses, and monitoring the time. Now, he practices what Buddha called noble listening, receiving each person's contribution with full attention, genuine curiosity about their perspective, and patience with the time it takes for real communication to unfold. The meeting that follows is remarkably different. People sense his authentic interest and respond by sharing more honestly about both challenges and opportunities. Creative solutions emerge from collaborative space that full attention creates. Even when difficult topics arise, the quality of listening allows them to be addressed constructively rather than defensively. This isn't a technique or strategy. It's a natural result of inner peace. When you're not fighting internal battles, you have attention available for external reality. When you're not defending against perceived threats, you can remain curious about different viewpoints. When you're not rushing to judgment, you can listen long enough to understand complexity and nuance. The ripple effects of integration. Perhaps the most beautiful aspect of integrating contemplative wisdom into daily life is how it affects others without any intentional effort to change them. Peace is contagious. Presence invites presence. Compassion evokes compassion. When Michael responds to his daughter's academic struggles with understanding rather than frustration, she gradually becomes less defensive and more open about her actual challenges. When he approaches his team with genuine curiosity rather than judgment, they become more honest about both problems and possibilities. This is a manipulation or technique. It's the natural result of how human beings respond to different qualities of attention and intention. We tend to match the energy we encounter. Anxiety begets anxiety. Criticism provokes defensiveness. But genuine care evokes trust. Calm presence creates space for others to settle into their own wisdom. Marcus Aurelius understood this principle when he wrote, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking." But he also recognized the social dimension. What injures the hive injures the bee. Personal peace isn't selfish. It's a contribution to collective well-being. Every person who responds to difficulty with equanimity rather than reactivity makes the world slightly more stable. Every individual who approaches others with compassion rather than judgment makes human community more harmonious. The challenges of integration. Living with integrated wisdom isn't always easy or comfortable. Sometimes the peaceful response isn't the immediately satisfying one. Sometimes accepting what you cannot change feels like giving up. Sometimes maintaining compassion for difficult people requires significant effort. All three teachers acknowledge these challenges and offer guidance for navigating them. The perfectionism trap. Don't expect to maintain perfect equanimity or constant peace. Integration is a practice, not an achievement. You'll have days when old patterns reassert themselves. The practice is noticing when this happens and gently returning to wisdom rather than judging yourself for being human. The engagement balance. Peace doesn't mean withdrawal from life's challenges. It means engaging skillfully rather than reactively. You can care deeply about outcomes while holding them lightly. You can work diligently for positive change while accepting that change often happens slowly and unpredictably. The solitude need, maintaining inner peace in a chaotic world, requires regular renewal. This might mean daily quiet time, periodic retreats from stimulation, or simply moments of conscious breathing throughout busy days. This is an escape. It's maintenance of the inner resources that support wise engagement. The community challenge. Not everyone will understand or support your commitment to contemplative living. Some may interpret your calm as indifference or your acceptance as lack of ambition. The practice is maintaining your path while remaining open and compassionate toward those who choose differently. The ongoing journey. 6 months later, Michael still faces the same basic human challenges. Uncertainty about the future, relationships that require patience and understanding, work pressures that test his resilience, and the ongoing reality of change and loss that define mortal existence. But his relationship to these challenges has been fundamentally transformed. Instead of being problems that disturb his peace, they become opportunities to practice wisdom. Instead of external enemies to be defeated, they're internal teachers that strengthen his capacity for presence, acceptance, and compassion. When his mother's surgery arrives, he's present with her anxiety, without being consumed by his own. When the quarterly numbers disappoint the board, he responds with honest assessment and adaptive planning rather than defensive justification. When his daughter struggles with new challenges, he offers consistent support without trying to control her choices or protect her from natural consequences. This is what the integrated life looks like. Not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of wisdom within difficulty. Not the achievement of perfect circumstances, but the cultivation of peaceful responses to imperfect circumstances. Not escape from the human condition, but skillful navigation through it. The invitation to begin. The wisdom of Buddha, Marcus Aurelius, and Seneca isn't theoretical philosophy meant for academic study. It's practical guidance for living with greater peace, wisdom, and compassion regardless of your circumstances, background, or current challenges. The practices are simple enough to begin today. A few minutes of morning reflection, conscious breathing during transitions, honest evening review, regular gratitude, and gentle attention to present moment experience throughout ordinary activities. But simple doesn't mean easy. These practices require consistency, patience, and willingness to repeatedly choose wisdom over reactivity, presence over distraction, compassion over judgment. The invitation is always available. Instead of waiting for life to become easier, begin developing the internal resources that can find peace within whatever life presents. Instead of demanding that others change to accommodate your preferences, begin changing your own responses to create more harmony in your relationships. Instead of postponing happiness until conditions improve, begin appreciating the gifts that already exist in this moment. As Seneca wisely observed, every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end. Let this be the end of living at the mercy of circumstances and the beginning of discovering the unshakable peace that emerges when wisdom guides your responses to whatever life brings. The path is ancient, the practices are proven, and the possibility is always present. The only question remaining is, when will you begin?